Ladies and gentlemen of the interwebs, what a difference a month makes in the ever-developing Tyler Robinson case, which we're going to be discussing tonight. I present to you two clips spread about a month apart, starting with the most recent, going back to the oldest. Baron Coleman, the speaker, on the top right, as you can see. Behold!
It's very clear that this alleged Penguich visit, and I'm not 100% sure he was there. I'm maybe 75 to 85% sure he was there. But we've got two eyewitnesses.
All right,
we
Andrew Wilson. No, I'm just
I did that as a nod to Andrew Wilson, 100%. But I mean, I'm pretty confident he was there, just based on how confident they were that he was there. But if he wasn't there, whatever. It doesn't change the fact that he still may not have been on the Losi Center roof. He still probably or may not have sent those text messages.
It is quiet. This conversation is supposed to be taking place shortly after 11 o'clock, while he is closer to Penguich than Orem if the Cowboys Smokehouse people are right. Now,
this is from an episode a month or so earlier entitled New Evidence That Tyler Robinson Timeline is Impossible. The same man is talking right now.
Now are you understanding why the FBI didn't follow up with Cowboys, allegedly? Now are you understanding why the prosecution didn't follow up with Cowboys Smokehouse? But the question is, why has the defense not followed up with Cowboys Smokehouse? It's quiet. It is quiet. Not it was quiet. Not I expect it to be quiet when I get back. Almost quiet enough to get out, but there's one vehicle lingering. How do you know there's a vehicle lingering? If you're in between Penguich and Orem, you can't know that it's quiet. You can't know it's almost quiet enough to get out, and you can't know there's a vehicle lingering.
I remember listening to this episode at the time, and I'm like, these are some bold-faced statements that are being made right now. You can't know because based on this receipt that showed you were at Penguich at the Cowboy Smokehouse, you couldn't have gotten there in time. So it's impossible. The timeline is impossible. July 12, 2022, 6.
It's impossible to know those things if you were at Cowboys Steakhouse until 9:50 or 10 o'clock.
And just yesterday,
it's very clear that this alleged Penguich visit, and I'm not 100% sure he was there. I'm maybe 75 to 85% sure he was there.
Hardy har, that's a hardy har.
Andrew Wilson, 100%. But I mean, I'm pretty confident he was there, just based on how confident they were that he was there.
I'm pretty confident yesterday, based on how confident they were, the two as of yet unidentified individuals, but they know who they are, presumably.
But if he wasn't there, whatever. It doesn't change the fact that he still may not have been on the Losi Center roof.
But if he wasn't there, whatever.
He still probably or may not have sent those text messages.
He still probably may not have sent those text messages. This is what's going to happen as this progresses and as people who have made not questions posed, positive assertions, the timeline, as new evidence reveals, is impossible. And you want to talk about this being a movement or an inorganic moment. Viva rushing back from his TPUSA briefing, says Ian McD 66. What's amazing is we're going to talk about this tonight when it comes to the Alex Jones reversal at the Court of Appeals. We were right then, by the way, people, when we were talking about the judge finding a way to bust the statutory limit, the statutory cap for punitive damages. We were right then. And it takes a little bit of time for the accurate, honest, insightful assessments to prove true in the noise of the time. 1.5 months ago, you had these people talking about a receipt that nobody's seen yet. The version published online was redacted, coming to conclusions, misleading millions of people into believing a timeline was impossible. And as it all unfolds, by the way, watch the scoundrels throw each other under the bus respectively. Now you're going to have Barron, as he's saying in that X space, well, I was only reporting what Candace broke at the time. Candace, as you saw during the Andrew Wilson debate, says, well, I was just reporting on what Diligent Denizen reported. It's his story to follow up on. Stay tuned. It's going to be him that follows up on it. They will all throw each other under the bus as these misrepresentations come to light. You want to call me a TPUSA? I've got nothing to do with TPUSA. Big fat nothing. Goose egg. Bagel. The only thing I've got is what I pride myself on my intellectual honesty. And if I make a mistake, I will own it. And I will not make statements that I do not think I can substantiate. And by the way, stay tuned. If it hasn't already been confirmed that that image that was circulated online to show that it's not Tyler Robinson was modified. Maybe it was an AI upscaling, so people can get me on that. It was modified. And at the end of the day, the truth will come out. Despite all of the hyperbole, despite all of the nastiness online. One thing after another. And again, I had on Joe Kent on Friday. And people say, Viva, you believe the official narrative. First of all, if the official narrative is that Tyler Robinson took the shot and acted alone, no, I don't believe the official narrative. I know what I can say I believe that I can't yet substantiate. I know what I can substantiate by way of evidence to substantiate the idea that there's no way Tyler Robinson acted alone to the extent that he was even the one that took the shot. But to go from there and to go to 11 months, a year of just milking the story, disinformation that actually feeds into people's desires. It's irresponsible. It's negligent. And by the way, they still refuse to have any public discussions, or at least have not yet accepted the offer for public discussions. Not a debate. It doesn't need to be a debate. Public discussion. I get into a fight with Clint Russell, who says, I accepted to come on a month ago about his podcast with Buckley Carlson, who incidentally I met and debated some of these very issues with at the event with Brendan Strzok. Is Clint Russell going to come on and answer to why, what's his face? Baron Coleman now is walking things back to the, well, if he wasn't there, whatever. If he wasn't there, you put out a 3-hour podcast of bullshit. Unsubstantiated, misleading bullshit. Whatever. He still might not have been on the roof. He still might not have sent those text messages. Oh, he couldn't have sent those text messages because he was at the Penguich Steakhouse. But if he wasn't at the steakhouse, well, he still didn't send them. I'll just have to find out what the next pivot's going to be. I will proudly look back on my assessments at the time, the same way we're going to do it tonight. Look back on our assessments of Alex Jones at the time, the injustice that was perpetrated against him at the time. And at the end of the day, people, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. You make your bed and you sleep in it. But there's going to be a whole hell of a lot of people not enjoying the soiled mattress that they are sleeping on, the fouled bed sheets that they now have to sleep on because that's what they've spent the last year building by way of beds. Ladies and gentlemen, how goes the battle? Viva Fry, former Montreal litigator turned current Florida Rumbler. Sunday night show. I don't know if you hear a squeak. I'm changing seats just because my legs are killing me. I have to stretch. I have to do also. I have to do hot yoga. I'm trying a different chair tonight, so hopefully it's not going to give me as much pain in my glutamus maximus. We got a great show tonight. Barnes is going to get here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. Some bona fide, serious white pills of cases that we've been following for years. Cases where my assessment at the time is going to age like a fine wine, as opposed to aging like Lionel Media. Lionel Media. I don't know who the guy is from A Hole in the Wall. Never heard of him until this whole Tyler Robinson came around. I didn't realize he was one of the Q, what they call the Q-tards from back in the day. I do have to find that tweet, actually. It's funny. He puts out a tweet and says how my integrity is thrown down the drain. Let me see if I can find this. And I don't take any of this personally. I just sometimes do get a little befuddled at how utterly insane some of these people are. Insane, like I'm not talking about Lionel. I'm not talking about people on the internet. Lionel, this should be a lesson to you. Are we looking at this right now? Oh yeah, especially social media influencer and analyst tyros. I don't even know what that means. Pay very close attention as to why is this guy talking about me? I mean, someone's gonna say, Viva, why are you talking about Candace Barron and him? Well, they're putting out the theories. I guess I'm putting out theories as well. Pay very close attention as to what Viva Fry has done. It's called throwing away credibility. And that's the same as severing a digit. No matter what you try to do, you can never restore it. First of all, Lionel, you dumb bum. First of all, you still have an open invitation to come out and flesh out some of your deep thoughts live on Viva Voce discussion. I'm sure it'd be great. The analogy is that of a broken vase. Trust is, credibility is a vase and it breaks and you can glue it together, but you still see where you glued it together. Dude, you were the Q-tard from back in the day. Until reading the comments, Lionel, I didn't realize you were one of the Q folk. I was trying to be nice. I'm trying not to be mean. Don't call him a Q-tard, call him a Q folk. Congrats. Your lunacy interfered with the legitimate election challenges back then, much like your lunacy is interfering now with the legitimate questions that need to be asked in the Tyler Robinson prosecution. History doesn't repeat, but it tends to rhyme. We'll come back to this in a year, Lionel. See whose credibility has been shot. I didn't know that Lionel was a Q folk. I do know what we said about Q at the time, and we proved prophetic. Go down stupid rabbit holes. You don't come out smarter, you come out stupider, and you come out having ruined it for everybody else in terms of actually pursuing the truth. Hopefully you get what you're looking for in the short term. I am looking for short term, nothing. Long-term accuracy. Now, by the way, let me make sure that we're live across all platforms. I see that we're live on Rumble. We're live on Rumble. Very good. Let me see that we're good in our vivabarneslaw.locals.com community. We got a man with an opossum, and we are live on. Make sure that we're live on CommieTube. I'm getting an ad, so we must be live on CommieTube. People, before Barnes gets here, I want to thank the sponsor of tonight's show. I'm going to bring up a QR code, scan it as we get into this, and you will thank me later for scanning it. People, it's Rumble Wallet Rumble Rants. First of all, this is a paid advertisement for Rumble Wallet. They are sponsoring this show. Thank you, Rumble, for making this possible. Anybody accused? He gets sponsored by Rumble. He's totally... Sorry. This is a paid sponsorship. Thank you, Rumble Wallet. You want to talk, people? You want to chat, and you actually want to get my attention? There is a clear line to it. Here's how it works. I'm going to prioritize Rumble rants sent through Rumble Wallet in particular. It's a little bit, you got to download the app and you got to get it going. If you do it, I will read it, and I will read it with the most animated voice humanly possible. If you send me one, I will respond. Simple as that. For a limited time, you can start the wallet with $5 in stablecoin, that is USAT, for tipping Rumble creators like me by entering my exclusive promo code VIVA5, not Viva Fry, Viva5, when you sign up now. Questions, hot takes, stuff you really want me to react to, buy a chat, put it in a rant, and I will respond to it. Regular chat, it flies by, especially with the amount of trolls that we have now, which is a sign of success, people. Here's the move. Scan the QR code that you're looking at right now. Download Rumble Wallet. Try it for yourself. Get $5 in USAT with Viva 5. Send a tip is easy. Open. You can tip anybody, by the way. It's amazing. It's basically a VIP lane to the chat. You want to shout out? Bill Tong has figured out the way to do this with regular rants. Maybe he'll do it with Rumble Wallet. We'll see. You can get $5 USAT. Viva code 5. Viva 5 for the code. I will be watching for them, people. Restrictions apply. There are a limited number of entries available. Let me bring you up to the website so you can actually see what the website also looks like. Rumble Wallet. Rumble is the I'm biased only because they're awesome. It's the innovator, the Rumble Wallet. You can invest in crypto if you're so inclined. You can tip, transfer, etc. Non-custodial wallet. Nobody can shut it down. It's amazing. Terms and conditions apply. See the description in the video description. It's in there. Thank you very much, Rumble Wallet. Now, let's see what's going on. Let me just do one thing here. I'm using StreamYard again. So I got to see if I can get this, that, and I have the open tab here. There we go. Okay, fine. I wanted to bring this up just to see what we got until Robert gets here. Got a couple of more things that I can deal without Robert. I look forward to hearing what Barnes has to say about Clancy, the Clancy trial. Everything I've seen online from both sides is nothing but a circle jerk of people making conjecture who never watched it. We're going to talk about the Lindsay Clancy trial. I had on Dr. Roger McFillin. His name is McFillin. I said, dude, I'm going to call you McLovin at some point during this interview. It was on Friday. I did 2 shows on Friday. One was the pre-recorded with Joe Kent, and the other one was with a clinical psychologist, Dr. Roger McFillin. Everybody, I apologize that there were audio issues. His audio was super low, and I think it was the first podcast they've ever done from their newly built out studio. I don't know what the issue was because I jacked up the audio on my end, and it might have been a gain issue on their end or something else. I republished it and meticulously went through the entire interview and brought up his audio and brought down my audio so that it was relatively level. Clinical psychologist talking about the, what do we want to call it? The pharmaceutical industrial complex. And it opened my eyes. We'll talk about it when Robert gets here in terms of the legal standard of not guilty by reason of insanity. But everybody should be watching that particular case. And it's terrible. The entire thing, even beyond terrible, it's actual horror. But then the only question is going to be, is she going to get off Lindsay Clancy? Now, I remember I was trying to figure out if I was in California the summer O.J. Simpson was acquitted, but I remember when O.J. Simpson was acquitted and the reaction, like it was a reaction, and I'm watching this as a Canadian saying, like, I don't understand race relations in America. How did this O.J. Simpson trial become white America versus black America? And I remember jubilation. I remember seeing videos of people in bars cheering. It was black America celebrating the O.J. Simpson being found not guilty, white America saying this is, an absolute atrocity. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, if Lindsay Clancy gets found not guilty by reason of insanity, I think we're going to see something of the same reaction from like liberal white women. Not all women, not all white women, liberal white women who are now lining up in the streets in solidarity, and not with the legal basis of not guilty by reason of insanity, as if there's, something that this is touching on in terms of the difficulty of being a mother that society somehow doesn't understand or recognize, and that everybody has a little Lindsay Clancy in them. There was this trend going, same Lindsay, and people were posting videos of them crying, these absolutely batshit insane videos of them crying, staged TikTok videos, same Lindsay, about how difficult it is to be a mother. Nobody talks about postpartum depression, all this other stuff. They've turned it into something that it's not, bona fide involuntary intoxication, to the extent someone says she was put in a psychotic episode based on all these medications and nobody was, knowing what the hell they were jacking her up on. We'll talk about it when Robert gets here. But before we get in here, I want to show this. You may or may not know, people, we've got a hot sauce from Biltong, and you're going to see a chat come in from Biltong. You recording?
Yes.
Hold on. Got to do a hair flip so that it matches the unapologetically wholesome. If you're having breakfast and you want something that's not too spicy, but delicious.
And color-coded.
You can see it. Oh, gosh. Don't waste any of it. Look at this. It's delicious. People. Verde. And you can get it. You want to taste?
Verde.
No, I want to see it.
You can take it. That bottle's yours. I'll sign it afterwards. Available, Biltong USA. It's delicious. Let me give everybody the link to this, and you can get some. I don't know how many. It just got launched, by the way. So sell it out and like cause a meltdown on Biltong's website. Here's the link. I'll give it to everybody now. See, Barnes is in the backdrop. We got Verde regular, Verde hot. Do it natural, delicious ingredients. It will take any meal, however bad, and make it better. And it'll take every meal, however delicious, and make it that much better. Robert, sir, how goes the battle?
Good.
We're going to make sure that the audio levels are equal here. I'm going to go back to our locals community. Robert, I haven't done it in a while, actually. You don't have a book on the backdrop anymore. What cigar are you smoking tonight? Or
it's an Upman, AJ Fernandez Sunrise. So that's good. The AJ Fernandez comes from a ex-Cuban, great Cuban cigar roller who left the country and then started rolling them for other brands across the Dominican Republic and places like that in Central America. But does some of the best brands. My Father brands, range of those derived from that.
And for everybody asking, by the way, Barnes actually does smoke the cigars. I spent a couple of days actually in Texas. It was more than a couple of days. Barnes, I mean, at the time, I don't know if you've changed you were basically like cigar from morning to sunset.
Well, that's the Mark Twain. So Mark Twain had a recommendation for a pre-breakfast cigar, post-breakfast cigar, pre-lunch cigar, post-lunch cigar, early afternoon cigar, pre-dinner cigar, post-dinner cigar, and late evening cigar.
I love the smell of secondhand cigar smoke. Whenever I actually smoke one, and I don't inhale it, I just get nauseous every time. Robert, we got one hell of a show tonight, and there's some issues that I know people are going to be waiting to hear your insights on, if only to mock you on social media like me. Bada bing, bada boom. What do we got on tonight's menu?
So the top topic was the two big wins for Alex Jones and James O'Keefe. They were partial wins. They could go further, in my opinion. But at least substantial wins in the right direction for even with 6 liberal Democratic women judges who are the only judges in the Austin Appeals Court. You can just look up the photo and see that's what nightmare looks like in the law today. Even those judges admitted things went too far in the Alex Jones case, but he's going to take that up to the Texas Supreme Court. We'll discuss that. The second top topic was the food freedom related topic. Blew up this week when the president announced plans to import foreign beef at a discounted rate to try to lower beef prices, and that triggered mass protest amongst ranchers and those interested in the food freedom cause across the country. We'll get into why those ranchers are objecting and what better solutions and policies might be available to the president. We've got on other First Amendment issues, we got a bunch of First Amendment cases. Alex Jones' case and James O'Keefe case are both First Amendment cases. James Comey's motion to dismiss is a First Amendment case. They tried to issue harassment orders. These harassment orders are constantly abused in First Amendment ways. This time it went really far, trying to limit a protester at a local zoo, no less. We'll discuss that First Amendment implications of that case. Then we've got the trials, a mega trial coming up with Meta that may put Meta's entire financial future at stake, pending in federal court in Oakland as 4 of the 29 states bring their first case to trial to start this week. Closing arguments start tomorrow in the Lindsay Clancy case. And then Tyler Robinson, all of the preliminary hearing briefs have now been filed. There will be oral argument, I believe, maybe about 10 days from now in the Utah court. Then we've got the antitrust case, people that even though the DOJ failed to properly pursue a major antitrust violator in the rental market space. A little FYI to Vice President Vance, fire your speechwriter who keeps having you say stupid things live, like rents are cheaper than ever and housing is more affordable for young people and AI data centers are your good neighbor. These are all incredibly stupid statements, Mr. Vice President. So please have you fire whoever's writing your speeches because they're idiots. But just as a little aside, that doesn't stop people from bringing an antitrust civil action against Compass for trying to fix rental rates that the antitrust division failed to prosecute because of corrupt, criminal, unregistered corporate lobbyist Mike Davis and others. Then we've got elections cases. We've got when states are exempt from the Voting Rights Act or Voter Registration Act, I should say. Missouri redistricting goes to the Missouri Supreme Court about the congressional seats there. The Democratic National Committee is challenging why there's fraud investigations going on. And then the mail ballot rolls are going back and forth in various federal courts that Trump had for his executive order on ballots. Then we've got a sequence of immigration decisions this week. Temporary protected status is finally reaching a judicial resolution as to the president's ability to terminate it. When can you raid a church? That went before a major federal court and a major decision for immigration raids. And then all of the state efforts to restrict immigration, whether it's restricting detention facilities in Colorado or creating special Bivens causes of action in Illinois. That also going to federal court. ABC sues the Federal Communications Commission, arguing the Trump administration is targeting them for First Amendment purposes. The questions on this version of Law for the People.
We're by the way, I had to pull it up while you were talking. Dude, this is what the Court of Appeal in Austin looks like, and no judgment. Where the hell's the diversity?
I have judgment. Yeah, I have judgment. 6 liberal white women. This is your nightmare. This is when I have nightmares. This is what I wake up to. Walking in front of 6 liberal Democratic white women.
And 5 of the 6 are blonde. Let me see how many. This looks like a joke, Robert. Like this is if we're going to talk about it, there's no black person, there's no man, there's no Asian.
There's a welcome to democratic diversity. It's a bunch of wine moms getting to decide your freedoms.
Robert, well, let's start with the biggest one, which is the Lindsay Clancy trial. I had on Dr. Roger McFillin on Friday. I republished the episode, so everybody should go listen to it because we did a 30-minute segment on this where he's been following it more closely, but from a clinical perspective, not from a legal perspective. And he gets into I don't know if the word cacophony is the right word. The cocktail of drugs that she was on. This is the woman, Lindsay Clancy, is not accused. She accepted facts across the board. She murdered her 3 kids when her husband was out.
Yeah, one of them was 8 months old, 3-year-old and a 5-year-old.
And one of them survived a few days on life support, and then they pulled him. Murdered them when her husband went to get some
strangled. That's the way in which she murdered him is notable here.
With not electrical, but rather exercise rubber bands. And then she slit her wrists and jumped off a balcony, I think head first. She's paralyzed from the sternum down. This was a registered nurse, no criminal history, nothing. And I'll just say it up front. I don't think anybody can do this if they're not utterly psychotic, but the only question is a distinction between psychotic and not guilty or not responsible by reason of insanity is a distinction. Someone can be psychotic and still know what they're doing is wrong. And I say one way or the other, jail for the rest of her life or institutionalized for the rest of her life. And however you want to qualify it, if it makes you feel better to say guilty, but insane, which no longer exists under American law. All that said, this is a woman who gives birth to her third kid, is having issues, basically ends up on a cocktail of drugs, some of which are more or less serious. So there's Benadryl, Zoloft, Ativan, and I think by all accounts goes into a state of delusional, what's the word when you think people are coming after you? Paranoid, psychosis. And then she, leading up, hearing voices in her head, she kills the kids. They go to trial. Now the only question is going to be, does it meet the definition of not guilty by reason of insanity? People are going to have some questions, Robert. Maybe you can flesh this out better than me. In the history of the U.S., there was a transition from, they once upon a time had a definition called guilty but insane, which from what I understand, they no longer have as a legal determination. It's not guilty by reason of insanity. There's no room left for guilty but insane. Flesh out what they need to prove, what the legal standard is for not guilty by reason of insanity, and what you think, broadly speaking, of what evidence has been adduced in this trial and where you think it's going to go.
Yeah, the main differences for her is sentencing-wise, whether she gets life in prison without parole under Massachusetts law, or whether she gets detained in a mental health facility where a judge has discretion to not impose that, or to release her every year or so, based on whether or not she has a continuous mental defect, and that mental defect makes her dangerous to the public. So a big potential consequence, because she could be out right away if she's found not guilty by reason of mental defect. Now, the way the law reads in Massachusetts is it's whether you're not guilty because of lack of criminal responsibility by cause of mental defect. And that doesn't require any burden of proof on the defendant. It requires the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she could legally and morally appreciate her actions if she did indeed have a mental defect. So one is to argue she didn't have a mental defect. The second is for the state. The second is to argue even if she did, it did not deprive her of the moral and legal capacity to know that her conduct was wrongful. And then the third is, even if she did have a mental defect, and even if it did deprive her of the capacity at the time of the act, the actus reus, what the mens reus was, whether or not if she was voluntarily intoxicated. In other words, if she deliberately took a combination of prescription medications, knowing it produced a substantial risk that it would deprive her of the mental ability to realize what she's doing at the time she's doing it, then too she's guilty. But they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. The historical example here recently is Andrea Yates. Andrea Yates in Texas claimed that she had to drown her five children because that was the only way to save them from going to hell. She was initially found guilty because a prosecutorial expert got the dates wrong of when a video was shown on one of the I think it was Law and Order. One of the TV shows featured somebody doing this and claiming they were, because of postpartum psychosis, mentally ill. It turned out that show was based on the Andrea Yates incident and came after the Andrea Yates murder. So that the Texas Court of Appeals then reversed the verdict, and on retrial, she was found not guilty by a Texas jury by reason of lack of criminal responsibility. In some states, they call it mental defect. Some states, they call it insanity. In Massachusetts, following the English common law dating to the 1840s, it's called lack of criminal responsibility. Now, America generally follows the Monotone rule, and this derives from an 1843 case in the United Kingdom, which said mere insanity doesn't deprive you of mental capacity to know the wrongfulness of your action. Mental insanity doesn't mean lack of criminal responsibility. In order for insanity to mean lack of criminal responsibility, it must deprive you of the capacity to understand the wrongfulness of your conduct, or to understand physically what's happening. What does that mean? That means I thought I was hitting a grapefruit when I hit somebody's head, right? It's that kind of mental defect. Otherwise, it's a mental defect that I had no idea what I was doing was morally and legally wrong. to be honest, Andrea Yates' defense made more sense within that context, in my opinion, than Lindsay Clancy's defense, from what at least I've heard so far. And the Andrea Yates said, I'm trying to save my children's souls, and the only way I can do so is to drown them. That's not what Lindsay Clancy's saying. She's saying that her doctor screwed up and gave her the wrong combination of meds, and that she was suffering from a psychosis, hearing voices saying she had to kill them. But I haven't heard yet. Maybe I missed it. I only saw summaries and summations of the trial evidence. I was not able to follow the trial, and so in detail. So, but from what I saw, so the closing arguments will be Monday. So, that I always recommend seeing that, see how persuasive it is to people. Also for young lawyers and law students, you can learn from watching closing arguments what was effective, what was ineffective, what would you have done differently, what would you have done the same, what would you borrow from what they did. I think for ordinary everyday people, it's useful just on its own grounds, independent of the social controversy concerning this trial, is learning how to make persuasive argument. What did you find persuasive? What did you not find persuasive in the style or structure or substance of the argument? So I think it's useful for those purposes. But I think that it's a Massachusetts jury pool. Leans, more. It appears, I don't know how they chose the jury and what went into it or what the jury is like. But from the social media response, I think the nature of that jury is going to dictate the nature of the verdict, because you're seeing a sharp split. You're seeing one group of people say, you have to be held morally accountable for this horrible act, and that her story is not a sufficient excuse. And then you're seeing a group of predominantly younger women and middle-aged women, be sympathetic to her defense. Even Candace Owens was sympathetic to the Lindsay Clancy defense. So I think the nature of the experiences of the jury and what went into jury selection will likely dictate the verdict.
In order to have a finding of not guilty by reason of insanity, or I guess it's not guilty. What is it?
But lack of criminal responsibility is how they call it in Massachusetts.
Is it?
That's what the jury instruction will be.
You just need one jury member to come to that conclusion, and you fail to have a verdict.
Well, no, then you have a mistrial, and then you can retry the case.
Okay.
So either way, you have to have a unanimous verdict to preclude. Now, I've long disfavored that. I believe that mistrials should be considered acquittals under the Constitution, but our courts don't agree.
Now, people in the chat are saying she was a registered nurse. She knew the risks of these drugs. There's a distinction in law between voluntary intoxication and involuntary intoxication. And one is you drink a Monster and someone spiked it at the factory and you have no idea there's LSD in it. You go on a binge and you kill somebody. And they say that's involuntary because there's nothing in consuming a drink that would lead you to assume that you could have a psychotic break because of a drug. Eating mushrooms, and if you go crazy and do something, not a valid defense. And people are saying when you take these psychotropic medications, these SSRIs and whatever, you're implicitly acknowledging that there's a risk that it might cause homicidal ideations, suicidal ideations, and whatnot.
Yeah, maybe we'll down the road add a component either to this show or do a separate videos along the lines of famous historical and cinematic and characters, because it's similar to understand the difference between voluntary and involuntary intoxication. The movie Memento, which is one of my favorite movies, in it you discover, I call it memento memory, where a person deliberately is creating fake memories for him tomorrow to act out on things he doesn't have the moral capacity, emotive capacity to do at the time, but knowing he's going to create for the next day for that person to do something evil, thinking he's doing something good at that time. That's a version of voluntary intoxication, if you will. He's deliberately setting up his mind so that his mind will do something horrific. Because he knows that what he's putting in is false the day before in the movie Memento. So that'd be a cinematic example of that. So the question is, I think the best evidence, we'll see what the prosecution says tomorrow, but the best evidence against her is that she seemed to show planning because she waited for her husband to be gone. It was only when her husband is absent that she does this. Like if you're truly losing it, if you truly don't have cognitive control, and that's part of the argument is lack of control, or you don't have cognitive capacity, then it shouldn't show up with things that suggest premeditation and planning. And then the fact that she's a nurse counteracting how she was mixing and matching the medications, putting her on an above average notice and knowledge of that. So my own view is I think there's the evidence that it will depend on your predisposition, I think, coming in to your degree of sympathy, because I'm seeing almost what seems to me from a distant irrational sympathy that yes, postpartum depression is very serious, but the degree to which you translate that into saying it's okay and someone lacks criminal responsibility for murdering their 3 young children seems to me a real big leap from one to the other. It's like, hold on a second, that those are 2 different things. So I see even like say women on the right advancing this idea. And so I get part of it is a lack of recognition of postpartum depression, and it's very damaging psychological and emotional young mothers. So I get that. But on the flip side of it, I don't think her being a nurse, her doing this while the husband was away, and the particular unless I missed it, her expert just said psychosis, not psychosis that precluded and prohibited her. That was the Andrea Yates defense. And to give you an example that Andrea Yates sincerely meant it, Andrea Yates, ever since she's been committed to a mental institution in Texas, has refused to even request to be released. So this was someone that clearly lost their minds and really thought their children were going to hell unless she murdered them. I was persuaded of that given her post-trial conduct. Am I persuaded here? At least not from what, again, only seeing glimpses here. So we'll see.
One big correction, and I made the mistake, and Dr. Roger corrected me, is that there was no, barring a mistake, there was no formal or diagnosis of postpartum. And
correct.
So in this case,
didn't her expert say that he believed she had postpartum psychosis combined with bipolar disorder?
But there was no diagnosis of either of those. The only issue is the
prior to her. Right. I mean, I'm just pointing out, what he's pointing out is that she was not diagnosed that prior to the murder, but her expert has diagnosed her with that.
Why didn't she testify? And I understand the risks of this, but if she wants to show that,
it would be really tough. It would be really, really tough. So I think most likely if they focus group tested this case, I don't know that they did, but if they did, what I have generally found is that it almost never benefits a criminal defendant to testify on their own behalf. That jurors will highlight anything. The jurors that are hostile will highlight anything that it's kind of like the book to movie problem. So when you have a character in a book, you have 100 different interpretations of that character by the audience. Once you put them on film, there's only one definition of that character, and you're going to dissatisfy 99% of the book readers. Same problem occurs at trial. Those people who want the person to be acquitted might have 12 different interpretations of who they are in the jury pool. Once they testify, there's only one interpretation left. So I have generally found it is extraordinarily difficult and disadvantageous for a defendant to testify on their own behalf. Now, maybe Carmelo Anthony should have. His effort at a retrial failed as the truth of that case came back out. But and then I guess that's probably his habeas argument. But outside of unique circumstances, like I thought in his case, his only shot was if he testified. Mm-hmm. But you only testify if you're about a 95% chance you'll be convicted. If you don't, I think if they picked a favorable jury, just looking at the social media reaction, though, if she has her kind of jury, she gets acquitted or at least a mistrial. If she doesn't, then she gets convicted is my prediction.
For those in the audience also, the fact that she was psychotic doesn't mean that she would not be criminally not responsible for the intent if she knew what she was doing was wrong and went out of her way to try to conceal it or do it when her husband would have been there. Would I, just to put a bow in it, just to go back to highlight the insanity of the people out there who were playing sleuth online and suggesting maybe her husband did it and threw her off when he got home. Look at her husband's eyes. He terrorized her or psychologically abused her into a form of psychosis. I mean, this is what we've gotten into in terms of people's propensity to manufacture conspiracies when they don't exist and propose insane theories with absolutely zero, social consequences for having put idiocy out there.
Well, speaking of that, now to a degree, briefly, we can talk about the Carmelo Anthony made a motion for retrial, got a new judge on the grounds that the prior judge was biased, or at least there was someone could perceive that judge as biased. I know that county, so it wouldn't surprise me. What didn't surprise me is the underlying evidence told a more complete story that was excluded from the trial. There was a gentleman's agreement, apparently, between the prosecutor and his prior defense lawyer. Carmelo Anthony has now replaced him with a new defense team. That basically the bad prior history of Carmelo Anthony would not come in as long as they didn't bring in the prior bad history of the victim of Carmelo Anthony's murder. And as I suspected, I thought it was like the likelihood that this just naturally happens and there's no backstory of any kind with these two people doesn't strike me as probable. And it turns out that the brothers had a history of racism, had been racist graffiti, been involved in violence before. The idea that they were these sweet, innocent, angels didn't strike me as likely the case, given how this escalated so quickly. And the same with Carmelo Anthony, that he didn't have the extensive criminal history that some people thought he had, but he had violence, so on and so forth. So it just turned out what you had was two people with a propensity towards racially biased violence on both sides, and led to one person murdering the other. I didn't think I didn't think there was grounds for a new trial, though, because it's not clear to me he was aware of any of the bad history concerning the victim. You have to be aware of that to know it goes into their state of mind or something else. So it wasn't clear to me that that's evidence that should have been admitted or that was a strategic error by the defense. I think it was an error by the defense not to put him on the stand, but that's hard to say that was so unreasonable. And it was a decision he himself made, which he's constitutionally entitled to. So I don't think he'll prevail. But what you will see on both sides is the narrative will expand. The narrative on the defense will expand into including the victim's history of racism and violence. And the anti-Anthony, the prosecution side of the narrative will expand to include his history of threatening violence, ready to pop off, telling people he was going to commit violence, committing violence, I think, against girls and women. I think, both sides get more for their public narrative, but I don't see the most likely still legal challenge is what happened at the jury selection stage of the case. That's the most likely appellate review issue.
So there was a motion to recuse the judge, which was granted, but it was mostly because of what the judge said after the fact, while the appeal was pending, nothing that happened during the trial. So that was granted. They replaced a new judge, big deal. And the motion for a new trial was denied.
Knowing that county, there was almost no chance he was getting. That county is an interesting county because it's an increasingly racially diverse county, politically diverse county, still leans Republican, but used to be a heavy lean Republican county. One of those rural counties that became a Dallas exurban county that's now a Dallas suburban county. So you got a generational shift, racial ethnic shift taking place within the county. But the old guard still mostly runs the county. So the old guard was highly unlikely, and that's who the judges generally represent there in that county. But the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is not known for being defendant friendly. So I think he's got a long shot on appeal, though I don't like how the prosecutor handled the jury selection.
Now, but I had heard about the Carmelo Anthony text messages to his girlfriend saying he's going to shoot her, how many bullets you want in your body, saying he was going to stab someone and lick the blood off the handle. But I hadn't heard about any.
Because conservative media is not covering the fact that the victims had a history of violence and racism. So much so that they had pled guilty and were on juvenile probation.
It said racist graffiti. I'm just reading a summary now. Metcalf and his twin brother Hunter were identified in an offense report for spray painting racist anti-Semitic graffiti that included KKK, kill black people, the N-word, Heil Hitler, and upside down cross. They received 12 months juvenile probation in Denton County. They reportedly told authorities they did some dumb stuff, did some vandalism. Multiple instances documented Austin using racial slurs at school. Classroom incident, he bullied a black student, used racial slurs. I hadn't heard of it. I actually didn't hear that.
Conservative media, God bless them, like to live in their own little fantasy land in their bubble world. I said from the get-go, the probability this was just one-sided in racism is really low. If you just understand the facts, you understand how unusual those facts are, and you understand the local community. The fact that a Texas high school linebacker was some perfect little Christian kid like Charlie Kirk walking out of a storyline is like, chances of that are low. If you just understand how this happened. That normal kids don't get obsessed with somebody sitting in their tent and demand that they be thrown out. That's not normal. Turns out the kid was a racist. Both of them were racist. Both of them were bullies. Both of them were punks. Now, does that justify their murder? No. So distinguish the two. But people who have this tendency that one side's got to be the devil and the other side's got to be a saint, rarely does reality in these kinds of fights ever line up to that.
So, and I'm not doing this to quell the audience. I don't care about these other facts about Austin.
I got upset everybody tonight. So I got a little one for every single person in the audience. I'm going to agitate them at some level.
Oh, don't worry about it. I've been getting text messages. You've been pissing off a lot of people this week. The question I was going to say, though, however, is was there any evidence, like set aside all of that? Okay, fine. Austin and whatever changes nothing in my view.
Yeah, see, I don't see how any of it would be relevant. He didn't know that. The kid didn't know that. It doesn't relate to his self-defense. So I don't see that as pertinent or material. Now, a smart defense lawyer would have found a way to get it in there. You would have found some angle to do it, of course, to try to plant the idea in the juror's mind. But it's not evidence. It's not material evidence that I could see.
It's irrelevant because Carmelo Anthony didn't know about any of it. So it's like he happened. Okay.
The only thing you could try to argue is it's consistent with an interpretation that the individual was bullying him in a physically violent, dangerous manner, because it's not because of character, but because of modus operandi that he had previously bullied other black students. So that it would have been a reach, but that's the only way you could have got that into the trial.
Well, I'm actually surprised that nobody leaked that during the trial, because that would have been a narrative shifter.
It tells you how much the media control about this case was coming from the right. God bless it. And the people on the right were not being impartial. They wanted a pre-done story, that fit their pre-done narrative, and they didn't want to be honest about both sides of racism in America. Just like some of the people on Anthony's defense don't want to be honest about black racism in America. The many people on the conservative right don't want to be honest about white racism in America.
Well, I'm trying to think of things I did as a kid that could have been qualified. I never got arrested, by the grace of God.
I only punched a bully, and I only told him that. I told him the day before, if you bully my friend, I'm going to come up and punch you in the face. The only person I've ever punched in my life. He was bullying my friend, so I came up and I said, I told you. I punched him in the face. He was mostly shocked. He didn't believe me. Then he quit bullying him. No problems.
I'm just trying to think of the things I could have gotten arrested for when I was a kid and I didn't. And by the, but people would have referred to it as punkish behavior or just stupid juvenile behavior. But, to the extent of this spray painting graffiti,
it's the escalation of violence that becomes bullying culture continues to be a problem, and escalatory, and the quickness and rapidity with which we go from 0 to 100 in violence is two of the big problems we deal with, aside from racism and prejudice and all of those issues.
Chet Chisholm says, I look forward to hearing what Barnes has to say about the Clancy trial. Okay, we got that. Then Maydog says, they better not be attacking Viva. That's when we get active. LOL. Don't worry about it. It frustrates me. It also dismays me in terms of...
Chris Martinson. Look, hey, Chris, I haven't been going around telling everybody that the reason why you call yourself peak prosperity is because you got completely wrong the theory of peak oil. Well, why don't you tell people the next time you want to be an oil expert how you got completely wrong your entire thesis for most of your economic life? If you're going to go around and lecture other people in the way he did this past week. I'm sorry, he's torching his credibility in live time doing what he's doing.
Robert,
but some of these people went way too far. And I get it. They're all buying the Candace slop while pretending everybody else is consuming slop. But I like Clint Russell, but you can't lie about people like he lied about you, he lied about other people in this process. Yeah, they're so going down this deep rabbit hole. What are they going to say and do when Tyler Robinson pleads guilty and confesses to the crime, of which I think there's a 75% probability? What are they? They're all going to look like idiots. They're all going to be laughed at forever. Oh, you can't listen to those people. You can't listen to Jimmy Dore. He thought a guy who confessed didn't do it. That's what I've been warning these people. They're torching their credibility for an utterly unnecessary way. That's my one message on that.
No. And if it were just that, it would be one thing. But the nastiness that and the lies about going after people and then sending these poison DMs and blocking and lies. But what also drives me nuts, the propensity of their own audience to forgive. Oh yeah, well, you just got the date wrong. My goodness, can you imagine if anybody else on earth of your ideological adversary lied to such a degree about a month versus a day and the discussion that was agreed to? They would never give them the grace that they give their own team. Okay, doesn't matter. Jay DeCory says, Robert, can you look into the retatrutide pharmacy industry complex, especially with Eli Lilly suing various groups? FDA is saying that the doctors can't use some peptides for safety. It looks like a lot like COVID meds, and I think you sent that twice, James. James, if you want the $10 back, I'll give it back to you the next time we meet each other at an event. Thank you for the double whammy, although I think it was inadvertent. All right, so that'll be all you say about the people not just torching their credibility, burning bridges with people that they've known for years. I won't swear.
Making stuff up, lying. I mean, Clint Russell's lie went viral. I mean, Clinton, you're so lazy. You can't even figure out the timing of a text. And I'm supposed to take you serious about your criminal defense expert? And I really get a kick out of people trying to tell me the overnight they've become experts in forensics, expert in medical forensics, expert in gun forensics, expert in the FBI, expert in state prosecutions, expert in the Utah law, expert in criminal cases. Come on, you're a joke. Like Texas delegate lady and these other people. The Nick Rekieta has done a great. Nick Rekieta could care less about Charlie Kirk, Turning Point, the politics of it, Candace Owens, all the rest. He's just going through as a criminal defense lawyer for over a decade. And he's experienced it both as a criminal defendant and as a criminal defense lawyer, as he can tell you, what the nature of the case is and what's strong and weak about the case. And he just went through all the things Candace got wrong in that debate. Basic things she got wrong. Ballistics she got wrong. DNA she got wrong. Oh, and Benjamin, just go back to comedy, for the love of God. Quit embarrassing yourself by saying just ridiculous, preposterous. I mean, he's lost his mind 10 years ago, God bless him. But just basically, they confuse fingerprints with DNA forensics. They don't even know what it means for DNA to be degraded. They don't understand that if you have a bunch of DNA on something, your DNA will be the most degraded because it's the most of the DNA that's there. Especially, let's say, if you were carrying part of a gun in your body, that's the exactly kind of DNA in which there'll be a bunch of DNA on the weapon, but a bunch of it will be degraded. They don't even know the difference between that. They don't know the difference between using 5 test samples to figure out which 2 sources of DNA are on a gun because they think 5 sources of DNA were on the gun. They don't know the difference on bullet forensics, continuing to insist, like Candace did and a bunch of her crowd did, it is impossible. It is impossible, according to ballistics and physics, for a 30-06 bullet to have caused those wounds. Even though you have tons of gun experts, long history of gun violent evidence going back to World War I, showing precisely that yes, indeed, you can be hit with a 30-06, like Martin Luther King was, and the bullet not exit. And people are like, huh? What? Oh, I can't be wrong. Oh, Candace told me otherwise. She's a ballistics expert. So it's just idiotic statement after idiotic statement, not knowing the difference between reliable hearsay and inadmissible hearsay. So you've got a certain form of hearsay that for expediency purposes is allowed in at a preliminary hearing. But it, under Utah law, is an elevated form of hearsay that has to be reliable for evidence that will actually come in at trial, or it has to be discarded. She doesn't know the difference between that. She doesn't know that 98, 99% of what was presented at the hearing will, in fact, be admitted in any trial against Tyler Robinson. And here's my ultimate. I mean, he confessed to his mom. He confessed to his dad. He confessed to his lover. He confessed to his... This is the evidence. This is what evidence has been adduced under oath in some form in the Tyler Robinson trial. So maybe later they'll contest it. Notably, the defense has not. There's probably a reason. But he confessed to his lover, confessed to his father, confessed to his mother, confessed to a deputy, confessed to people on Discord. You know who identified him on those surveillance tapes? Tyler Robinson identified himself on those tapes. That's who. In multiple forms. You know how they have documentary proof of it? They have the people who received it saying they received it from him. They have it from his phone. They have it from other people's phones. And they have it from the Discord and phone servers that they searched and seized. How do you think he turned himself in? They have to convince themselves the texts aren't real. The emails aren't, the messages aren't real. The way in which he turned himself in isn't real. The gun isn't real. The forensics isn't real. The DNA isn't real. The videotape isn't real. This is how the level of lunacy and idiocy these people are discrediting themselves in lifetime pursuing. And last but not least, by the way in which his defense lawyers, who are some of the best in the country, have pursued the defense, it is quite obvious he has told his lawyers he's guilty. They know not to pursue evidentiary paths that will blow up in their face because they already know he's guilty. So they're trying to save his life like a smart defense lawyer would do because they're not as stupid as Candace and her kooky crowd.
Let me flesh this one out, Robert, because it is an ethical prohibition to publicly assert that a document is false if you know it to be true. And so I'm not trying to argue towards that conclusion. I'm just saying if they, to the extent if
he had told him even that he was innocent, they would pursue every lead on God's green earth because they would think there's something somewhere, someplace that might shake loose. They would challenge the reliability and authenticity of everything, the video evidence, the gun, the bullet, you name it, the medical examination, the forensics, the DNA. They challenge everything everywhere. They're laser focusing on the things that might get him off the death penalty because he's already told them he's guilty. Like he told everybody else.
I was going to say that might answer the question as to why the defense hasn't jumped on the Panguitch receipt that Baron Coleman was asking himself at the beginning of the show. And that is to say that if they know a piece of evidence to be true, whether or not it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt because it's a preliminary hearing, they are ethically and legally prohibited from calling into question its veracity if they know it to be accurate, correct?
You can question whatever you can fairly question, but it's unproductive, because if you do something that undermines your credibility and confidence, in this case, they're arguing to a court to try to win at the prelim hearing. By the way, if there was any issue of the DNA, they would have brought it forward. If there was any alibi that would blow up the timeline, they would have brought it forward. They're waiting for the trial. No. You don't wait for trial if you have that kind of evidence out of the gate, especially a high-profile trial like this, where that one little piece of explosive evidence would have gone viral. Everybody in the Candace and the Clint Russell and the Lionel media and that entire crowd would have gone berserk if simply one single piece of major evidence blew up any single part of the prosecutorial theory. The reality is they knew there was no basis to pursue them. They understand Lionel is just a clickbait whore chasing around, trying to be relevant still in his old age after Candace Owens. The things he was accusing you and others of is what Lionel was guilty of. And Lionel knows it like everybody else. The people that are in the defense, that's why you see almost nobody with legal skill or legal acumen. I mean, Baron Coleman is a loser and a former Fed. He's a former informant, people. That's who you're relying on. That's schmuck. Nobody considers him a reliable lawyer or legal analyst. Come on. Lionel's just doing what he can because he's on the last dying days of his media career. The days of being on Law and Crime and even on RT are over for poor little Lionel. So he's desperate to ride the Candace coattails into Wine Mom world and fantasy delusion place, where Lindsay Clancy is innocent, and so is Tyler Robinson in Candace world. But if you get back to this world we used to call reality about law and facts, it was obvious from the moment he turned himself in, and yes, he did, he turned himself in, that he was highly likely to be guilty. For the 200th time plus, that does not mean there was no conspiracy to murder Charlie Kirk. That does not mean there were no accessories before and after the fact. That does not mean there were no accomplices before and after the fact. That does not mean the Israel lobby's off the hook. That doesn't mean the intel agencies are off the hook. That doesn't mean the FBI is off the hook. As you did interviewing Joe Kent this week, they shut down that investigation prematurely without following all leads. And we have Utah Valley University lying and deceiving Turning Point, as was confirmed again in text that came out this week, lied and deceived the Turning Point into believing that rooftop would be secure when they prohibiting Turning Point from securing it, while not securing it themselves and not allowing a drone to be there illegally, because they asserted legal authority they did not have to prohibit it. So we've got false flags in the sense of cui bono, people that could profit and benefit from this, including the Trantifa community, Manchurian Candidate Connected Intel community, and the Israel lobby, that have not been pursued or investigated, despite Joe Kent's efforts to do so because it was shut down and blocked. We've got an unusual and unexplained and unexpected security lapse by the Utah Valley University, and dig into Utah Valley University and Intel ties. It won't take you too long. And then you've got the unexplained nature of how Tyler Robinson got radicalized overnight. However, what requires pursuing those leads as legitimate possible leads means you incriminate still Tyler Robinson and you exonerate Turning Point. And for the Candace crowd, that's unacceptable. Turning Point must be blamed. His widow must be blamed. His best friend must be blamed. And that means you can't blame the people that might actually be accessories before or after the fact. And so they've decided to chase a rabbit hole, a red herring, right down a rabbit hole. And in the process, they are immunizing the criminal co-conspirators that may in fact be present.
I had to fact check you in real time, Robert. I said, is Baron Coleman a former Fed? And it says, no, there's no evidence Baron Coleman is a formal federal agent, FBI, or any other type of Fed. The informant details, court filings from 2016, Mike Hubbard ethics case in Alabama revealed that Coleman served as an unpaid confidential informant for the Alabama Attorney General's Special Prosecution Division starting
Can you imagine if anybody, like if anybody on I got a big kick out of people accusing Nick Rekieta of being government. I was like, he obviously don't know Nick Rekieta, the hardcore libertarian who, he fought the law and sometimes the law won. But he's always been on the fighting the man side, not being on the man side. And his level of knowledge, along with Andrea Burkhardt, is really fantastic. She has done a great job, and Nick has done a great job. I learned a lot from watching Nick's breakdowns of just, the DNA evidence issue, the ballistic evidence issue. Nick obviously knows a lot about guns, so he knows that aspect very, very well. So I think that, and my general advice, on Polymarket, I put out as a free pick that Tyler Robinson is likely to be convicted of murder. It doesn't require to be convicted of aggravated murder in the Polymarket by July 31st, because I think he's likely to plead guilty as long as the prosecution takes the death penalty off the table. Only way this case is the death penalty be on the table. Now, then there's risk that the trial is delayed or a mistrial occur, and he's retried after July 31st. That's the only real risk, that you were to be incorrect on that prediction. But the reason why I predicted is because his defense and everything that I've seen in evidence presented in the hearing or in court, because some of this comes from affidavits that were provided in support of search warrants and probable cause to begin with for the purposes of arrest and detention. That's the source. That's the sole source of everything I've referenced on here, is evidence that has been sworn to under penalty of perjury in court, that it can be proved by what has been presented. And whereas almost everything Candace Owens talks about is something that's never been presented in court. Almost, all this crap. But for all those people, do you want to stake your credibility on somebody who's probably going to confess? How are you going to look? This is even to some friends of mine down in Austin, Texas. How are you going to look when it comes out when he confesses? Everybody's going to be saying, "Oh, right, you thought that person didn't do it, and they confessed it." And I'm willing to voice all kinds of skeptical theories about cases. I think OJ's still innocent. So it's not like I'm afraid to voice controversial theories about high-profile criminal cases. But the problem with it is they're just ignoring the evidence. They're having to go to greater and greater conspiracy theory lengths. And anybody who points that out, now the attacks like they did this week on you get even nastier and vicious and personal, and they get defamatory and libelous and slanderous because they can't defend their positions substantively.
I want to bring up one of these points. I don't want to play the whole video, but I'll play a bit of it. I just wanted to get clear on one fact, that during the debate with Andrew Wilson, Candace Owens said that Joe Kent told her there were 12 Israeli cell phones on
and Joe very politely tells you he never told her that.
That's so. But what's wild?
But he does it very diplomatically. He's like, I think she's confusing a couple of things. I think she's adding this and transitioning into this, and because she's adding this, he goes, I don't think she meant to say that. I think Joe knows she meant to say that, but he's just being nice and diplomatic and avoiding deeper into the controversy. His problem was there was legitimate evidentiary leads to foreign involvement that was not limited to Israel, because there was clearly an Antifa allegation here. And he felt the need and obligation as counterterrorism director for the United States to investigate that. And counterfeit Cash Patel, just like Dan Ballas Bongino. Is there any doubt he's Ballas Bongino anymore? Come on. We got to admit, he's Ballas Bongino now. He's going after Brandon Stalker? You go after Brandon Stalker? Dude, you're totally ballless. But went after Richard Paris. He went after Richard Paris this week. This guy's just like devolving and collapsing in live time. He's becoming as kooky and crazy as Queen of the Kooks, Candace Owens herself.
Let me bring it up. The one thing I don't understand is why people hate Joe Kent as much as they do. I posted that not because I think
he exposes their hypocrisy to themselves. Well, if you want to pretend you're a real big patriot and you're and that you're real pro-America, and Joe Kent says going to war with for Israel against Iran is not being pro-America, is not being a patriot. Those people look like fakes. They look like phonies. They look like frauds. And consequently, they start losing their minds and attacking him. And you get a lot of confession through projection, which is becoming a recurrent, whether it's Trump talking about Iran, whether it's people Lionel Media talking about you this week, other people, they're confessing their own problems in live time because the cognitive dissonance is reaching sky high as the evidence contradicts what they claim to believe.
Well, when I got accused of being a bad father, or a disgrace of a father, holy crap! I'm not getting into it. That's not my business. But no, all that to say. So this guy, I don't know who the guy is. He says, it brings me no pleasure to tell you that I was right about Joe Kent. Yet another man I once saw as a patriot turned to be a total hack. I hated it. Whatever. His story just fell apart. This one, Robert. I think we're living through crazy times. It was never his story, as far as I understood it. He never
said it at all. He never went out and told anybody that. Oh, by the way, there are a bunch of Israelis there at the scene. In fact, that was never something he said. That was never something he broached. It was something they might investigate who was there. And as he pointed out, at a university campus with that big of a crowd, you're going to have all kinds of foreign countries likely there, especially when you throw in people using VPNs that are disguised as coming from a foreign nation. So he's like, that's just something you would want to pursue because it's going to be the case in that kind of setting. You would expect to see it. And Candace's version of it is not his version of it. Never was.
And again, I just wanted to know because it sounded like it was Mel K, Village Crazy Lady, who first reported it. And I remember it being reported at the time.
God bless. She's living up to her reputation these days. I'll give you an accurate moniker. Crazy Lady. Crazy Lady. Another person discrediting all of their other legitimate criticisms on a wide range of topics because they say some of the kookiest and wackiest and nuttiest stuff. It's amazing watching this in live time after the 2020 election where people ran down the Dominion rabbit hole and completely blew up all those election cases. Or like we'll get to in a second, people did in Sandy Hook when there were legitimate objections to pursue. Why the politicization of Sandy Hook? Why not talking about the mental health illness issues that we see in the Clancy case that were present in the Sandy Hook case that Alex Jones identified on the night Sandy Hook happened? He said they won't look at the Hollywood celebrating violence to our young men. They won't look at the degrading of culture towards young men. They won't look at the over medication and prescription of dangerous medications on young men. They won't look at the inadequacy of school safety protocols and having guns on campus to defend those kids of the school systems. Instead, they'll just criminalize the inanimate object. And none of those things got pursued because because this group of people became obsessed. Sandy Hook didn't happen at all. I'm sure I hear from them every day. Every day. Someone will email me, Barnes, you fake, you fed slop person, phony, fraud. Everybody knows Sandy Hook didn't happen. And it goes on and on and on about this. And that's how they, just like the Candace crowd going down. That's what I mean by the Sandy Hook rabbit hole. Not that Sandy Hook was legitimately covered by the press or the culprit was legitimately blamed by the institutional media, but rather that this nutty theory that Sandy Hook didn't happen at all, that, by the way, Alex Jones disowned for 99% of the time InfoWars covered it. He only greenlit it indirectly, in part, briefly, twice. And that's what he had to go through the worst lawfare known to man that got partially corrected this week.
I'm going to read a few. And just to highlight one more time, peeps, no one ratified the Sandy Hook lawfare against Alex Jones. It was the fact that there is a Sandy Hook operation here similar to get people to say crazy things so that the questions that I have to ask, the ones that Joe Kent confirmed were doors that had not been knocked on necessarily, don't get knocked on now. Now nobody has to listen to it. And it's a happy accident.
Rabbit holes and red herrings. And they're always going to do this when there's really a crime they're trying to cover up. Because every great crime needs a great patsy. So what you want to do is be suckered into the official institutional narrative, but at the same time, don't be suckered into the red herring rabbit hole narrative that will distract you from the real criminality, the culpable part. That they did this during right after the Kennedy assassination, sending people down 100 different fake rabbit holes so that they wouldn't pursue the obvious one. This is happening to this day in the Kennedy conspiracy community. That they will be injected once every year, 2 years, with some fake narrative that's meant to rabbit hole and red herring, blame something and somebody else to discredit and damage the legitimate questions people have. I've seen this. This is an old trick. This is a COINTELPRO counterintelligence trick for centuries. The Soviets did it. The early Bolsheviks did it. You can go back generations and civilizations that have specialized in this. But seeing people like Clint Russell take the bait on it so bad is just sad. He's just swallowing one red herring after the other while he dives into one rabbit hole after the other.
Let me bring this up here. King of Biltong says, enjoyed your Biltong USA order. Please leave a review when placing your next order. Nobody's tipping with Rumble Wallet. Get the wallet and maybe Biltong can do. And yeah, I read Biltongs all the time. Leave a positive review when you place your next order at biltongusa.com. It helps others find us and means a lot to our small business, a small business that is now carrying the line of hot sauces. I want his website to be overloaded. Use code VIVA for 10% off. Dominant One has rated the stream. Steve Eisner says, Barnes' 3-minute monologue masterpiece just blew the doors off of Candace's 23,186 words. Yes, that's the actual number of diarrhea of the mouth she spoke in the debate. And Dominant One says, obviously, Barnes has not shoved Anton's firm and juicy meat in his mouth to calm himself down. From King of Biltong, as he did not use discount code VIVA, do it. And Jay DeCory says, use the extra $10 to get hot sauces for the umbrella guy and Megan Fox. Pleasure to meet. It was awesome meeting you. Now, hold on. Let me bring this one out. Bring it out. And I want to bring these up, Robert. If you keep your views on race to yourself until the line is crossed, are you really a racist or vindicated? Okay,
I read the creative question. That's it. Okay, that's much better than average. That's
I read without approval or admonishment. Thornton Maloney says, I don't think the Clapping Seals are going to be ready for what actually happens on November 3rd if they actually ever believed it. Oh, no, not now. Now the reality sunk in. They're like,
oh, it depends. There's a half that it hasn't. There's people that were, Seth Keshel, I think, was blocking me this week when I, pointed out. I wrote a Substack piece on the Senate and predicting and forecasting the Senate. And all of this week, discount will be the last week of a discount. It's almost 2/3 off the annual price at sportspicks.locals.com. That will have all my election predictions posted, all my soccer picks predictions, baseball, basketball, football, event markets, economic markets, price of oil, whether certain geopolitical events will happen, things like the Tyler Robinson, where you could get that at 44%. I think it should be at least 75, 80%. But the discount is, you have to put in discount code. You have to go to the web version and you go to the discount code, and the discount code is 1776. And you get basically about 2/3 off the annual price at sportspicks.locals.com. This is the last week the discount's available. Then no mas until Christmas time.
Let me say, did Barnes really say he believes OJ is innocent? Yes, he did.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And I'm going to debate it. The plan was to debate it with the body language panel at some point, but could do it with somebody else somewhere along. I have to go back and refamiliarize myself with some facts. But yes, I mean, I have doubts about that dude that got killed, blamed for killing his wife up in the Bay Area.
Yeah, Stacy Peterson. What was her name? His name was.
What was that guy's name? I'm always blanking on his name. Clearly a creep, but I didn't think he was a killer. He was a cheater, but not a killer. Was my hypothesis. I even have do I have? Oh, that's a good hush hush. I don't think I published my hush hush yet on that. So for all the hush hushes, you can go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com if you want to see the effective way to present alternative narratives to the institutional and official narrative.
It was Drew Peterson. Nathan Danner 4030 says, Joe Kent did say the best way to beat Iran is to abandon all our bases in the Middle East. There's a word for it. It's called surrender. No, he had a better argument. I mean, he had a better
surrender.
Argument.
Who cares? We've already lost. The longer we're there makes the loss worse, not better. It's called the sunken fallacy syndrome. You don't keep throwing something in. When you're digging, quit digging. To not go deeper and deeper and deeper. Trump only keeps making the problem worse. He could have got out of this in April with minimal economic and political harm. And instead he keeps pounding it because he's obsessed with, I can't be looking like I surrendered. I can't be looking like I defeated. That's only going to make the loss worse and more harmful and more hurtful. So beware of the sunken fallacy syndrome, which unfortunately the president is not.
No, and I'm just it brings me no pleasure to talk about any of it. I've got nothing to add to the discussion, so I'm not. It's not a question of doom pilling. I got nothing to add. It's just it's bad, and they'll find out in November. We've been sounding the alarm for a year and a half, and at this point, there's very little to do, and other than belabor the issue. But they're still not listening.
Or make make money on it. If a bunch of commies are going to win, you might as well put some money in your own pockets. Have a capitalist solution to the commie problem. Go to sportspicks.locals.com. Become a member. Make some money.
Now, speaking of commies, Robert, and speaking of the lawfare, Alex Jones got a bona fide W. I just don't know exactly.
Even commie judges recognize what happened to him was bad.
Well, we talked about it at the time. I was trying to find some of my tweets on the subject, but it was more video analysis because this is going back to
2022.
2022.
The trial was 4 years ago. That's when we were in Austin covering the trial. The people went nuts when I walked into the trial one day. The defense lawyer was hopping around. Bobby Barnes. I mean, I have Mark Bankston. What a nut that guy is. By the way, to his clients, you might have a $50 million legal malpractice claim against them based on this decision. Heck, maybe there's some lawyers that will work for you for pro bono just to sue Mark Bankston and crowd. Just say it. Just put it out there.
Robert, at the time, we had talked about this, that they were trying to argue punitive damages beyond the statutory cap, which I think was $275,000. Maybe, I don't know,
$750,000 was the exemplary damages cap.
Okay.
Per person.
750,000 was the exemplary. Okay. So not punitive, but exemplary.
It's the same thing.
And so after the, Jones was defaulted, after they raised their, they made all their arguments about the damages, they gave the plaintiffs permission to amend their pleadings to argue for the to make an argument.
Disabled. They were disabled, so they're outside the cap.
Yeah, so they made an argument that the exemplary damages could exceed the statutory cap, and they came down with what, $50 million exemplary.
Yeah, it was about $45 million in just punitive damages.
And I remember we said it at the time. It's like they're going to find a way to get beyond the statutory cap, just because this is what's going to happen with that stupid judge. What was her name? Gretchen Bellows was Connecticut. I forget the name of the Texas one. Doesn't matter. This is like Charlie's Angels. Let me see if I want to bring it back up again. We got to get the visual. The Charlie's Angels of a nightmare of a jury of judges. Where was it? I can't find it anyhow. They came down and said, no, it was a violation of procedural law, a violation of, I don't know how they fleshed it out, but they said it was invalid to have amended the pleadings afterwards to make arguments that were not presented at any of the hearings to exceed the statutory limit for exemplary damages. And they brought it down to, they reduced it by 50 million, give or take. I mean, that's the number roughly.
Yeah, essentially you had, so there were multiple issues up on appeal. The one issue was whether or not the default judgment should have been issued. So for people that don't remember, Alex Jones was sued under defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress for public statements he made concerning Sandy Hook. The constitutional issues were always, how could people sue him? And there was one issue, the statute of limitations, that most of the claims, the statements they were made were way outside the statute of limitations in both Texas and Connecticut. Second problem was the constitutional issue. Why was he being punished for his speech? That is particularly given that most of these plaintiffs could not identify any factually specific statement about them as an individual. Indeed, in many cases, Jones had never talked about them at all as individuals. So instead, what was so dangerous, and this is what's still dangerous about this case, and this is why Alex Jones is going to be appealing it to the Texas Supreme Court, and then after that, the U.S. Supreme Court, is because this is a statement from the Texas Court of Appeals, basically spreading a false narrative, quote unquote, false narrative, not fake, not inaccurate statements about a identifiable person, but rather false narratives constitutes intentional infliction of emotional distress if those false narratives offend somebody. Think about that for a second. This means anybody and their mother and their brother could sue you if they don't like some theory or opinion you have about any high-profile topic that they are offended by, however indirect that may be, because they don't constrict.
And I remember we were talking about how that precedent could have been used and abused in the context of the George Floyd, where people were saying he died of a fentanyl overdose and not at the hands of Derek Chauvin. And I think a couple of people may have gotten sued in that. I would have to refresh my memory. But it wasn't as politically relevant to shut up all of those people when it came to George Floyd as it was for Alex Jones. But what a wild, insane precedent that attempted to create.
It's an attempt to make conspiracy theories illegal and punishable by state courts to bankrupt you. You can be bankrupted now if you have a conspiracy theory that the courts don't like. That's the reality. And somebody somewhere within the zone of danger of that emotional harm can sue. Now here, this hypocritical court contradicted itself. So the court in this decision, one of the issues was, how could they even bring intentional infliction of emotional distress claims when defamation claims were available? Because the law in Texas is intentional infliction of emotional distress doesn't get to be a surplus claim. It only gets to exist when there's no other legal claim you can bring. So the jury knew how bogus this case was underneath, because when they were asked to give damages for defamation, it was only $100,000. That's all they could come up with, because there was no real defamation of these by individuals by name of a specifically identified false statement of fact within the statute of limitations and within constitutional punishment prescription. So instead, what the Texas Court of Appeals did is, one, they lowered the malice standard and negligence standard, but they said anybody could sue. Because I brought the challenge that my role in the Alex Jones case was at the very beginning. I still get people who think I represented them all the way through. I did not. I represented him at the very beginning on the constitutional part of the argument. Then I gave some advice on tax issues, which led to about a $5 million refund that he received, as he has publicly stated. Otherwise, I wouldn't mention that. But he publicly said, Barnes got me $4.7 million plus. That was my role in the case. But my constitutional challenge that we brought at the very beginning of the case was the constitutional requirement of colloquium, namely that in order for it to be a constitutional remedy for your speech to be something you could be punished for, you need to make a factually false statement with actual malice about a public figure, even if a limited purpose public figure. And that statement has to be about a specifically identified individual. It can't be about a big group. It can't be somebody who feels offended by your statements. That can't be it. Otherwise, we have effectively a heckler's veto on speech that they can bring through state punishment. Because remember, this is state action. This is individual action. This is state action when a state court issues a judgment against you for monetary recovery using state power to do so. So that's why the First Amendment restricts the state court to the 14th Amendment. The Texas, this same appellate court, the different judges, but same appellate court, said, oh, no, you could bring a defamation claim under those circumstances, and colloquium was not a constitutional requirement. Now they had a problem. If that's the case, they can't bring in intentional infliction of emotional distress claims. That was part of what we were trying to set up at the time, by the way. So what does this Texas appeals court do without even referencing that prior decision? In fact, they never talk about that particular prior decision in their entire case because they don't want anybody to look back at it. They talk about all of their other opinions they've issued, but not that opinion. And they don't talk about that opinion because that opinion exposes what they say later, which is, oh, no, you can bring intentional infliction of emotional distress claims because you can't bring a defamation claim because he didn't identify you by individually. Huh? You just contradicted what you said 6 years ago, you frauds. That's the Texas Court of Appeals in Austin. The Texas Texas legislature needs to reconsider its appellate courts. But there's constitutional reasons why it's currently constrained, that it's supposed to be by the locally elected office. But they could make that a little bit broader than what it is now. So you don't have a bunch of six liberal Democratic women. The demographic that hates Alex Jones, if you look politically, he's mostly a beloved figure, but there's a demographic that hates him. Self-identified liberal Democratic women with a post-college degree. That's everybody who is judging him. He's literally being judged by the people who hate him the most. So that's why they go out of. Then they come up with shenanigans for the death penalty sanction. They admit that the judge didn't even take any evidence or hearing, didn't have a real hearing on this because it didn't have an evidentiary hearing to substantiate.
And just so nobody gets confused, the death penalty sanction was defaulting Alex into liability, not a death penalty. It was the ultimate
not allowing
sanction.
him to defend himself on the merits. Why was Mark Bankston scared of even a liberal Democratic jury in Austin, Texas, hearing the facts about the merits of the case? Because he knew, as all of the other people knew, they didn't have a case against Alex Jones if the facts were fully presented, even to a bunch of liberal Democratic jurors. Because we had focus group tested it in polling surveys, and I'd seen the evidence, and the evidence exonerated Alex, didn't incriminate Alex as to the core of the theory they were trying to blame him for. Mm-hmm. So they needed him to not be able to present a defense on the merits. The judges at the trial court level figured this out over time. And the trap that Jones was put in was, we demand you produce evidence of your guilt, that you knew what you were saying was false, that you were making money off of this, that you were propagating and encouraging other people to be violent or be nasty towards these people, and show all of the internal data that proves it. Of course, all the internal data rebutted it. So it's like, I don't have any evidence of that because that didn't happen. So what does the judges do? Oh, you must be hiding that evidence. You must be destroying that evidence. You must be misleading with that evidence. So we are hereby going to default you based on you didn't produce evidence of your guilt because there was no such evidence of your guilt. That was the game they were playing, which they don't really acknowledge. So how do they get around all the problems that the trial court judge didn't follow basic procedure before issuing what's called in Texas the death penalty sanction? They basically say, oh, it's a deferential abuse of discretion standard. Yeah, there might be a First Amendment constitutional restraint in a defamation case about the use of such a penalty. Yeah, there's a due process constitutional constraint. But we're going to say whatever the trial court did is mostly beyond review. That is going to be a problem with the Texas Supreme Court. I think the Texas Supreme Court, which has repeatedly told lower courts, do not use the death penalty sanction outside of rare circumstances. And that's why, by the way, they don't cite in support of their position a single Texas Supreme Court case. They only cite Texas appellate court cases from across the jurisdiction. And it's a very selective version that they cite. They skip all the ones that said error, and error. because this is one of the most egregious examples of death penalty sanctions and constitutional violations in the history of Texas courts. But putting that aside, putting the fact the discovery dispute was fake, putting beside the fact the underlying claims were bogus, putting aside for the fact that the death penalty sanctions were an egregious violation of Alex Jones's constitutional rights and liberties, they ultimately at least did admit at the end of the equation that, waiting to come up with an excuse for exemplary punitive damages until after the trial is already over probably is a little bit egregious. Yeah, you think? And so even liberal Democratic judges had to reduce the verdict from $50 million to under $5 million.
But now, what does it indicate for the rest of it? The Supreme Court failed to intervene, but it was on a separate question. A year ago? We had two justices. You only need three on the 7 Texas Supreme Court justices. They're elected statewide. They're all Republican conservatives. We got at the very beginning of the case 2 justices willing to take the cert. All you need is a third. And things have got a lot worse since then. Now, the issue is, on the Texas Supreme Court, a lot of those justices are tied to the Bush family political regime. Now, fewer of them now than was the case then, because this was back in 2018. So this was 8 years ago. I think there's 2 new ones at least, maybe a third. Still Republican conservative, but a little bit less tied to the Bush political machine. Who is the number one critic of the Bush political regime in the state of Texas? It was Alex Jones. Yeah. I mean, Alex Jones accused him of helping create 9/11. So needless to say, he had no friends on the liberal Democratic side. He had no friends on the liberal Democratic professional class side. And he had no friends in the Bush regime side. And that's who dominated all of Texas. That's why he couldn't find justice no matter which way he turned. Imagine one of the more egregious actions that this appeals court did is this Texas appeals court winked at the Texas trial court issuing default judgment because Alex Jones had been critical of the court. Hold on a second. Now being publicly critical of a court conducting show trials, which is what they were. They were literal show trials. They played me during the trial about show trials. Well, I mean, for people that don't know, it was literally a movie. The judge converted her courthouse into a literal movie set. She had 4 movie camera companies come in and place cameras, movie camera style. This wasn't like a little camera sticking up in the corner filming the trial like you see when you see videotape trials. This was movie cameras floating around the courtroom trying to get the right angle. Right above the jury, by the way. Imagine you're a jury. You're like, I'm part of a movie trial. I'm part of a movie set. It's like when I was part of a play in a theater in Murder for the Prosecution, I think it was, in the UK, where as part of the play, you got to be part of the jury. But that's what this was. And by the way, the judge literally walked the red carpet at the movie premiere. Come on, Texas. You look like a disgrace. Your justice system looks like a joke. If the Texas Supreme Court has any pride in itself, least of all the Constitution and the law, it will overturn and throw out this whole bogus case that is a disgrace to the Constitution of the United States of America. Let me bring up one. I don't know if this is going to be the best clip to highlight this, just to show a bit from the trial.
I mean, I said years ago, I thought something would happen.
Robert Parker's sitting right here. He's real, isn't he?
Yes.
And for years, you put a target on his back, didn't you?
Objection to the form of that, Judge.
Well, I mean,
didn't you?
The judge just overruled that question.
Well, and this is the Connecticut case. So the Connecticut case isn't as egregious as the Texas case.
Oh, no, I'm trying to find the Texas one. I get mixed up. The 2 judges look the same, but I was saying, like, where were they?
One was a Republican woman, basically 2 wine moms as state court judges. But apparently, according to them, saying something bad about them is grounds to issue the death penalty sanction. Itself a First Amendment violation by that court. So the whole Alex Jones case is a walking, talking, living constitutional violation against Alex Jones. We'll see if the Texas Supreme Court steps in. We'll see if the U.S. Supreme Court steps in. But you know how bad it is when even the most liberal Democratic women-dominated judges, and because they fit the demographic that hates Alex the most, that's why I'm referencing that combination, even they recognize the case was so egregious, such an abuse of law, that 95% of the verdict had to be knocked down and struck down.
Only of the exemplary damages, the 1.5 billion, or I guess whatever 1.4.
Well, that's the Connecticut court case. So the $1 billion case is out of Connecticut. The difference. So this is the Texas case, which was only about 55 million total. So
Hold
it's
on
now
a
been
second.
struck down to $5 million. But what's key here in Texas, though, is the Connecticut case is in the bankruptcy proceedings. The Texas case had the whole receivership going on. The receivership was justified on this enhanced verdict. Now 95% of that verdict is gone. So what happens to the receivership? Did they have to return the old InfoWars facilities back to Alex Jones? A lot of those questions are yet to be answered because of the impact of this, because 95, and that basically the two plaintiffs, based on what the appeals court said that if they had properly alleged this from the get-go, they could have got $55 million. So what does that mean? It means the two plaintiffs have a $50 million legal malpractice claim against Mark Bankston and his law firm. And I think, for one, they should bring it.
I'm mixing up the Connecticut and the Texas quantum. Okay, well, that's, I say, some good news, at least, coming out of Texas.
Another good First Amendment win this week. It was a partial First Amendment win for Alex Jones. The big one, I think, is yet to come, but will come, I believe, in Texas. Another partial but substantial First Amendment win was for James O'Keefe in the D.C. circuit, no less.
Well, and I might be getting his lawyer on this week. I think they wanted to hammer out some details as to what they could and could not discuss. But this one goes back in the day where 2016, it was what was that thing called? I remember the guy's name, Scott Fovel, and this guy named Bob Creamer, and they go Democracy Partners. And
democracy. It's a very EU definition of democracy. It means they win. That's what they mean by democracy.
It's like, the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a very democratic, yes. or the People's Republic of China. James O'Keefe did what he's always done. It's undercover. He gets a woman in there who, gets these guys to flap their gums. They go undercover. They get the recordings. They get the videos that show that these people are basically rigging elections. They publish it.
Different ways to commit voter fraud all across the country.
Yes, the series was called Rigged Elections, which it showed how they use dark money to basically to circumvent the law. They put together the piece, they publish it, and then they get sued for damages because it was almost like tortious interference, where they argue that the publication of what they said, which they actually legitimately said, cost them contracts, and they sued for damages, and they initially won. Robert, refresh my memory in this one. It wasn't exactly damages resulting from broken contract. It was
damages they lost the contracts because of the publication.
Yes, but they argued fraudulent misrepresentations of the undercover journalist in order to induce them into
a wiretapping violation, because the person recording them was a fiduciary under DC law. At least that's what they argued at the trial.
Well, and they succeeded on a couple of those claims, which have now been reversed, where they said there was no fraud, wire fraud in any of this. This is basically protected First Amendment undercover journalism, and the damages were not damages of defamation. It was the loss of the contract, not because of any lies or any fraud, but because of what they said became public and basically overturned it or reduced the damages from the initial order. What's the other than being one of James O'Keefe's few losses in the first instance, and now it's not a loss on appeal, what are the broader implications of this? The concern at the time was always that this criminalizes undercover journalism by basically saying, if you unless you tell them that you're undercover journalist, they're going to argue some sort of fraudulent misrepresentation, and it makes undercover journalism outright impossible. It criminalizes the consequences of the wrongdoing by criminalizing the exposure of it. Does it have broader implications other than just a big W for James O'Keefe?
It's a partial victory for James O'Keefe. And so I hope he takes up part of this to the Supreme Court of the United States. The part of the victory is the verdict was thrown out. And the verdict was thrown out on the grounds it violated the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Those are the big wins. The problematic aspects is how much they constricted and constrained undercover journalism. Because essentially what this case was about was attempting to weaponize the power of state courts in state civil and tort law in order to make illegal or make bankruptable the act of undercover journalism, which has been essential to First Amendment freedoms of the press for forever. The court ultimately focused saying on that the jury verdict included as part of its basis the loss of contracts those loss of contracts stemmed from at least some covered First Amendment activity, and because the verdict did not segregate out what was not protected versus what was protected, the whole verdict had to be thrown out, and said that somebody that's an unpaid intern is not a fiduciary under DC law, subject to the wiretapping law even being applicable. So that's the good side. Now here's the problematic side. They said that they said there's no First Amendment right to engage in undercover journalism. That was that's problematic from the court's decision. They acknowledged an independent review has to happen of any jury verdict whenever the First Amendment is at issue. That was good. That any damages stem from publication rather than damages that stem from the underlying claims of fraud, of trespass, of wiretapping. That if the publication is the source of the damages, then that is a First Amendment violation if the information in the publication was obtained by lawful means. That's a problematic aspect. So it's good that they recognize that if the source gathered the information unlawfully, but you as the publisher gathered it lawfully, that then you have full First Amendment protection in your publication. Even though they didn't explain this very well, they had to say that because that's what the Supreme Court determined in New York Times in the Pentagon Papers case. Because there was no dispute in the Pentagon Papers that those papers were not lawfully obtained by the New York Times. But the argument was the New York Times obtained them indirectly unlawfully. In other words, the person who gave it to them was the one who obtained it unlawfully. They didn't directly obtain it unlawfully. This is the Julian Assange case, where they're trying to preserve the right to go after whistleblowers if they can allege the whistleblower themselves is the source of unlawful obtaining of information. So I didn't like the fact that they were provided no First Amendment protection at all for how you obtain the information. If you obtain it in any manner they consider unlawful. So anything that was obtained by fraud, they said could be punished. Anything that would make if what you obtained, what happened here is 80% of what he published came from a separate undercover reporter who did not use fraud to obtain the information, lied and did things like that, but didn't obtain employment through fraud to get access to property they otherwise wouldn't get access to. So they said that's why that part of his publication is First Amendment protected, but effectively they challenged the very predicate of a lot of what James O'Keefe does. They said that anything that was procured by fraud, that's what undercover journalism is, it doesn't have any First Amendment protection. That's why I hope he takes it up to the Supreme Court of the United States, because they recognize that contractual claims and proprietary claims are always outside First Amendment anyway. In other words, if we have an agreement that you won't publish my name and you publish my name, the fact that you're engaged in First Amendment publication activity doesn't immunize you from my breach of contract claim. They also misrelated. They talked about stealing trademarks as if stealing trademarks means unlawful method of gathering information. No, it's because that's a proprietary right in the copyright or the trademark that it doesn't immunize the publication because it's a different violation of a different law of a different remedy. That's why. They instead basically took a broad statement, and the broad statement was they made a good fiduciary determination, so nobody can call it wiretapping if somebody's just an unpaid intern, because in order to be a fiduciary, you have to be an agent with delegated powers under pretty much all fiduciary law everywhere, including the District of Corruption, and consequently, this could be done. But what bothered me about the case was they said, if any information you obtain unlawfully, and then you subsequently punish it, you can be punished by a court with no First Amendment protection at all for that information and that publication. That's a serious direct threat at O'Keefe's fundamental model of undercover journalism. It's going to mean he needs to, just let people bring him the information from undercover reporting without him retaining them or hiring them or training them as agents to do so. Otherwise, he's now subject to being sued for just the publication of it under this D.C. Circuit precedent. So that's the part that's dangerous for First Amendment freedoms and James O'Keefe, and I hope he takes it up to the Supreme Court.
Okay, because my understanding of it was, that they had overturned the wiretapping initial verdict on the basis that there was the individual actually did not have any legal fiduciary obligation to keep the information private, which in that I could sort of understand. If you're within the company and you leak it, I don't know if you have any other whistleblower protections if they're doing something illegal, but there you have an actual fiduciary obligation where you can sue for damages. Here it was that this person
more robust. Here's what doesn't make sense to me. if I report something to the police, or I file something in court, or I report something to any agency, state or federal or local, I'm immune from defamation and libel claims. And yet, if I'm somebody who reports the illegality of government operations or the illegality of private enterprise to the public, then I can be sued?
Well, but do you not have a fiduciary obligation to disclose the illegal activities of a company? Like
that would be my view, but that's not how this court is interpreting it. This court is interpreting, like, in other words, if you're reporting something to us, the government, then we'll immunize you. But if you report anything bad that the government is doing or that big private actors are doing to the public, then we're going to punish you. This is a complete policy contradiction at the foundation of the law. And the biggest problem was saying that anyway, if you directly obtain information that's not a lawful method and illegal here, merely being violation of a tort law or a state statute. That's how broad they're interpreting illegal. We're not talking about stealing information, hacked information. We're talking about not having the legal authority to disclose it. If you don't have the legal authority to disclose it, now none of that publication is protected under the First Amendment. You've gutted whistleblower protection and undercover journalism in this country. Well, I hope he takes it up to the Supreme Court.
Well, it's interesting. Okay, I'll definitely flesh those questions out if I say it's not Bill Barr, it's his attorney Barr comes on this week to talk about it. Okay, amazing stuff.
Now, we have 3 more First Amendment cases tonight that were the part of the loosely the top topics at vivabarneslaw.logos.com. James Comey, when harassment goes too far in terms of harassment orders, and the ecclesiastical abstention. When you get to lie if you're part of a church.
Let's do the James Comey. Well, we'll start with James Comey. We're going to get to all of them. The ecclesiastical, by the way, people, this is the actual exception. Ecclesiastical exception, where the courts don't intervene with ecclesiastical decisions, if that's the word. James O'Keefe made his motion to dismiss, arguing it's all First Amendment protected speech. It was no true threat, and therefore they didn't charge for incitement. And that was the thing that sort of irritates me is it seems like what he did was more incitement or trying to cause a public incident as opposed to issue a true threat. He put out a brief. I went through it last week, and it's as good of an argument as you can make because it's mildly compelling. He says they only charged me with true threat. What I said was political hyperbole, in my argument, but at worst, it doesn't even rise to the level of true threat when comparing it to the guy who said, I'm going to go and first thing I do is put LBJ in the crosshairs of my rifle. He says, it's known political hyperbole. He goes on to say how the definitions are not violent ones to begin with, that it's political speech. It's the most protected of political speech, and that it should be dismissed. Reading it like that, I think it's going to get dismissed only because I had to go back and double check and refresh my memory. What would the charge that I'm looking for, Robert? Causing a public disturbance. I don't know if public nuisance would be the right word. To me, it sounded more like when he said, 8647, he's not saying I'm going to do it. He was begging one of his followers to do it as per my theory of the case. And in which case it's not a true threat. It might be incitement or whatever, which they didn't charge him with. So are you as, if he's going to succeed this time the same way he succeeded the last time on the other charges, he's going to get these tossed and he's going to walk and he's going to have the last laugh?
I don't think so because of the standard at the motion to dismiss stage in a federal criminal case. In a federal criminal case, for him to dismiss at the indictment stage, at the pleading stage, he has to prove that there is no set of facts in which any reasonable jury could conclude that his statements constituted a true threat. And to conclude that, and that you're cabined and constrained by the indictment and by there being no set of facts. So, for example, the mere fact that he had to allege a bunch of facts in his motion to dismiss was a giveaway that he doesn't meet that high legal standard. And as the government pointed out in its response, most of the courts in the criminal context to adjudicate this question have concluded that it's a jury question, that unless there's literally no set of facts in which it is possible for any reasonable jury to convict, then it has to go to the jury to determine the context. Now, what you need to prove, what the government has to prove at trial, is beyond a reasonable doubt that that someone objectively, that is a recipient of that message, would interpret it as a threat, and that James Comey subjectively intended that it be perceived as such. This is important. It doesn't. You don't have to prove he intended to himself murder President Trump. You have to just say that he intended that some people perceive it in that manner.
That some people perceive it as a threat and not some people perceive it as an incitement to go do it themselves. I mean, could they not have charged him with incitement, and would there not have been a better argument for that?
Not under federal law. So for federal law, this is a very specific statute they charged him with. That is the attempt, a true threat of violence against the president of the United States. So it's a very specific law with a long list of adjudication over the years. Because it's one of the more commonly brought cases, because you'll get a couple a year at least. Now here's what the prosecution pointed out is they just point out, here's what some of the evidence is. I think what Comey's trying to do here, while just taking a long shot at the dismissal, is he's trying to smoke out from the prosecution, what's your theory that you're going to present? And the prosecution even points this out, and prior courts have pointed out not to let it become that. Don't force the prosecution to explain why they think they will win at the jury stage. All that matters is there has to be any set of facts from which any rational jury could find it to be a true threat. And again, true threat, words or actions that, taking into account the context in which they are made, cause the victim to fear harm in the future, and evince intent on the part of the speaker to cause such fear. Again, to cause such fear, not actually pull the trigger yourself. And again, what Comey did is he photographed that he had accidentally come across randomly on the beach a bunch of seashells that looked like that said 8647. And he took it down later that night or the next day saying, golly gee, I was shocked to discover the word 86 could have any violent ramifications or implications whatsoever. Even though apparently his wife was texting him the cover story in advance 2 minutes before saying, oh, here's a definition of 86. And he made up a completely fake story to the press and a late night TV host about how he came across this. None of which is believable. Comey's just lying his ass off. Here's the big problem.
What's
and
amazing,
this connects to our Alex Jones case. Comey was about to publish a novel that he authored all about how people use wink, wink, nod, nod in the court of public opinion to convince people to act out violent threats.
That's what I was going to say, that because it was a 3-part post. He's on the beach reading his book. He puts out 8647. And then the third post is a description synopsis of his book, which talks about the main character having called for political violence by name, action to be taken, and some of his followers oblige, killing some of his political rivals.
Exactly. And by the way, what the person in his novel did that he claimed in his novel was illicit incitation to violence was far more vague than what James Comey did. So I mean, there's the obvious contradiction. It's clear. I have no doubt what Comey was trying to do. He was mostly trying to stir up controversy, but he wanted to stir up controversy because it meant, hey, why don't you go murder the president? Oh, golly gee, I could never have intended that. What? I just accidentally came across it because he's such a habitual and hopeless liar. If he testifies, he'll commit perjury probably a half dozen times, and all of other charges to bring, no matter what happens with the verdict after the trial. But it's fascinating who this book's about. It strongly suggests that James Comey was involved, as in fact James O'Keefe and other related organizations that are like James O'Keefe exposed several years ago. A guy, by the way, who was found by one of the J6 wrongfully prosecuted defendants using discovery, found video and footage of this individual at J6, and it was the individual who was also on tape at a separate undercover investigation, revealing that he helped organize and orchestrate the lawfare against one Alex Jones. And what's James Comey's book about? An effort to target someone who is a right-wing radio host who says things that can be interpreted to incite violence. In other words, he was, and you can tell from his description, that he was likely behind the organized lawfare against Alex Jones, and he's trying to portray Alex Jones as a persistent, dangerous threat because of various vague language claims and statements made that are far more vague than the one he just made. And the problem is he's been part of cases that have prosecuted people for true threats for even less. That's one area the prosecution needs to develop more, but they're probably sitting on it because they know he's going to get up and say stupid stuff. He's likely to lie because he can't help himself. He's a profligate liar, James Comey. And they're probably waiting for him to get up and lie on the stand and then ambush him with, didn't you say this in this FBI memo? Didn't you say this in this prosecution memo? Didn't you say this in this statement to a court? Because James Comey has prosecuted people for true threats for far less. That's where Comey's in serious trouble come trial, and I think he is going to face trial because of the high standard that has to be met, unless the judge is in his pocket, which you never know these days.
All right. Well, that's the James Comey. I'm gotten cynical, Robert, but I hope I'm wrong on this, because you also make some good points. I fleshed it out from the beginning. This was clearly a 3-part act, and it was not just a one-off. And anybody who denies what he was doing, it was just to sell his book, is still not a defense. Like picking up a child and saying it was just a joke, just a social experiment, is not a defense to kidnapping a kid, nor is it was just a joke a defense to theft. A marketing ploy for your book is not going to be a defense to what he did. And he deserves serious retribution for it. Okay, what's the next one? Before we get to Ecclesiastes.
This is when they got a harassment order. These restraining and harassment orders. Remember, James O'Keefe was the victim of this. They're violating the First Amendment, going way past their original intention. And this was a crazy one out of Massachusetts, no less.
It's a former vet at a zoo who was protesting some of the treatment of the animals. I don't know if it was that they had exotic animals. I think it's that they had exotic animals. She was protesting the treatment of these animals at the zoo, and getting in the face of people, or at least getting in the face of principals of the zoo to protest, what they're doing there. They get a restraining order, basically. What did they get? A restraining order. They got a gag order. They went after her criminally, and basically got an order to the effect that she could no longer protest, and went after her criminally because apparently she got too close on one of the incidents. What was the outcome of this one, Robert?
So this is the people have experienced this throughout the country. So they originally established harassment orders and restraining orders related to it, protective orders, things like that, to deal with a specific subcategory of issues, which is domestic violent emergencies. So supposed to be somebody who is threatening someone to commit an act of violence against a spouse, a partner, or a child at imminent risk, who you wanted to have quick, expeditious judicial remedies to protect them while they escaped from that situation, and then could fully litigate any other legal questions or controversies with them. I was one of the first protective order lawyers in the country in Southeast Tennessee, representing victims of abuse in rural areas, small towns, big cities, you name it, for several years. What happened, however, is they misused and abused those laws to increasingly going after situations that involve economic competitors, that involve political protesters, that involve things that have nothing to do with domestic, intimate, violent relations, because they made the mistake of liberalizing these laws to be outside the intimate relation requirement that was originally imposed, and thereby opening the door to judicial abuse of power to restrain and restrict and punish people's speech and engage in basically pre-speech prior restraint, which has been unconstitutional from day one, that you can't have prior restraint on someone's core First Amendment activities. So this is a vet protesting conditions at a zoo, which if it's a zoo, about 80% chance they're doing something bad and mean to animals somewhere in there. There's some animals that never should be in zoos or parks, the rest. I was reading a fascinating thing about orcas. They're actually killers of whales. They're not themselves whales. They come from the dolphin family. They have an unusual nature of empathy that if you isolate them from their community, they go mad. And that's why orcas never kill humans in the wild. They do when they're basically driven mad. So it's someone that we should not be holding captive in any setting. So you have an old school, former vet out there protesting the treatment of animals because they're like a real vet rather than the fake vets that are part of these big hedge funds that have been bought up as private equity capital that are trying to do things like harass the Amish and take over food supply, which we'll get to the food freedom case here in a bit, which is the second top topic at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But basically, they point out true threat requires a direct threat of imminent physical harm. To what we were just talking about in James Comey case. Words or actions that, taking into account the context in which they arose, would provoke victim in a fear, a victim to objectively fear it. So that's an objective, reasonable person standard, and subjectively they intended someone to fear it. And they pointed out none of these statements constituted that because this was political protest, First Amendment protected activities that someone is engaged in. True threats are an exception to the First Amendment. This didn't meet that true threat standard. And then they also couldn't be fighting words because that's limited to personal insults, inherently likely and imminently likely to incite a violent reaction. And this didn't constitute that either. They're trying to cram political protest into I'm scared, I'm afraid, I'm offended, in the way they were impermissibly allowed to do in the Alex Jones case. They tried to illicitly get away with here, and the federal court correctly ruled, maybe in the state court, correctly ruled, no, that violates the First Amendment, a good First Amendment restraint on these harassment orders.
Amazing. And then the third one, which is a church that was investigating allegations of sexual abuse of one of its pastors and made some statements, public statements that were arguably, but not arguably defamatory if they were accusing one of the pastors of having sexually assaulted or abused. I believe it was an underage person, the woman.
From the time she was underage. Yes.
From at the time. And he sues for defamation. And this got to what level? The Court of Appeals? Is this
Texas
Court of Appeals?
State Court of Appeals.
Texas State Court of Appeals. So it's more than one judge, which without adjudicating on the truth or wrongfulness of the underlying statements comes. Who knew that there's an ecclesiastical exemption where the courts don't get involved in order to adjudicate on the internal workings of churches in particular, correct? This is not like, I don't know if there's an equivalent for synagogues or for mosques, but
it would apply to them too. So once way back, we covered another Texas case maybe 3-4 years ago on this. That was about whether it only applied to the Catholic context, about canons and whatnot, and they explained it applies to any the internal operation of any religious organization. What's interesting here is the people suing were not part of that religious organization, and these statements that were published, while they were published originally internally within the church, they were then repeated and replicated externally to the public about this individual disputing the abuse allegations. And so it's an interesting, they keep extending and expanding that how do you say that?
Ecclesiastical abstention.
Ecclesiastical.
Internal workings is one thing. Internal adjudications, if the people agree to be governed by religious law. I mean, would it work would you have an ecclesiastical exemption for fraud, for unpaid taxes, for internal?
Generally, no, that depends on you have nonprofit status for churches, and that can be jeopardized by certain kinds of activities that are not permitted under the Internal Revenue Code if you're one of those recognized organizations. So but generally it wouldn't be for that. It's an interesting. It's basically they said if it concerns internal organization, state courts have no role. So things like taxes would not be considered concerning internal organization. But statements, even if those statements get externally punished, they're saying if they originated and were inextricably intertwined with internal discipline or character fitness test of religious leaders, because what they're afraid of is churches being unable to make statements within the church about a character determination of an individual within the church that would subject to that church to external review by a state or federal court about the truthfulness of such a statement, that it would discourage and deter frankness in the church internal governance process. So I get where their policy motivation is. It's just when it's an extrinsic statement about a person extrinsic to the court, it strikes me as maybe a little more of a stretch than the court was willing to admit and acknowledge. But just remember, everybody, if you want to libel somebody, do it from inside Congress or within the church.
I was going to say, well, not even inside Congress. Do it just as a member of Congress, wherever you want.
Get elected to Congress, and you can libel everybody. You can say whatever you want about your old bosses, your ex-wife, you name it. You can say anything you want just to become elected to Congress or talk about it in church. Save it for church.
What do we segue?
I wouldn't say this outside of church, but so and so is a hoe. That's how that works, everybody.
What do we segue into now?
So we got the second biggest top topic tonight was the food freedom cases. We also got the mega trial concerning Meta and a range of election and immigration cases, and then a bonus case that concerns Harvard trafficking in people's body parts. So so we can go to the interesting or the most engaging.
Let's do let's do the TPS. I mean that is in the news. This was TPS involved challenging the revocation of the TPS for Ethiopian. Robert, remind me what state we're in right now. No, this is what state did this take place in?
Oh, this is all the TPS. So we had a bunch of, so we got the quartet of immigration decisions. Oh, actually, the most logical nexus one would be go to the church raids one. When can you raid a church? Speaking of First Amendment protections and church issues. But we also have temporary protected status, detention facilities, state laws trying to regulate the immigration detention facilities, and state laws attempting to regulate ICE enforcement by creating their own Bivens claims. So we got the state regulation components, the temporary protected status components, and then the big one on can you raid a church or religious facility to detain an illegal immigrant?
Well, okay, we'll start with Illinois passing its own Bivens law. Refresh everybody's memory as to what a Bivens law is, Robert.
We don't really have a Bivens law. It's what the Supreme Court recognizes. When can you sue a federal officer for violation of the United States Constitution? And they keep limiting it. The old defense used to be that you did not have immunity at all if you broke the law broke a local or state or federal law as a government, a federal law official, but that you had as a defense, you acted within your constitutional powers. And if you did, that was a defense at trial. Instead, the courts have decided to engraft the immunity that was given to kings, because kings could do no wrong, on the federal government, and say that it doesn't matter how egregiously a federal government official may have violated your constitutionally protected rights. Doesn't matter how knowingly they may have done so. You can only sue them in very limited circumstances when their violations concern the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution and not anything else. So because of these restrictions on the ability to reach federal law enforcement officers violating people's federally protected civil rights, Illinois, also because they want to regulate and restrict immigration enforcement in the state, have passed their own state Bivens Act, attempting to regulate under state law federal law enforcement officials. This is an extension of trying to do so under the anti-masking laws that we've talked about. These other laws that there's right now a contested extradition request between Minnesota and Texas over one of those ICE officers involved with one of the shootings in Minnesota. So you're going to keep seeing this state-federal conflict on the issue of immigration, which is kind of an inverse of what happened under the Obama administration, when states tried to pass restrictions like Arizona on immigration and tried to enforce it locally, and the Supreme Court prohibited them from doing so. Now you have states the opposite direction, trying to restrict the federal government's enforcement of immigration laws by creating a bunch of disciplinary or regulatory restrictions or disciplinary mechanisms or compensatory damages provisions, like Illinois did, by creating its own Bivens action for ICE officials.
Well, how do you codify, if you have the right already, how do you codify it at the state level? If you don't have the right, how do you to sue the feds? How do you create it at the state level? Just, I highlighted a couple of the sections here, just as that they created the Illinois Bivens Act. Defendants contend that the Illinois Bivens Act is innocuous. So they create this law that gives you the right to sue for particular damages. And they claimed that you couldn't sue to invalidate the law itself because no one was enforcing it yet. And there was the other portion which I found wild was, first, the Illinois Bivens Act permits any person to sue for constitutional violations committed while being subjected to civil immigration enforcement. And then the second part, what do they call it? The CASPA. Court Access Safety Participation Act creates a privilege against civil arrest for parties, witnesses, potential witnesses, and court companions going to, remaining, or returning from state court proceedings. That's sort of the buffer zone they created around courts. But I mean, if you have the right, what do you need it to be legislated for or codified at the state level? And if you don't have the right, how do you go about creating that right at the state level lawfully? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, you do have a right. But those rights are limited by federal courts and enforcement. But the state's ability to enforce these rules they're trying to create. The problem is the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution and the interstate immunity that is intergovernmental immunity that is part of that. So sometimes federal preemption, that federal laws already regulates this space, so you can't intrude or undermine that because it's comprehensive and expansive. Sometimes it's because you're discriminating against the federal government and targeting them. So, for example, you can have state traffic laws that govern federal law enforcement agents, but that's neutral because it applies to everybody. What you couldn't do is say everybody can run a red light except federal government law enforcement officials. Then you're discriminating and targeting them in ways that intergovernmental immunity prohibits. And here, they're targeting federal government officials and activities, clearly. So I think that's why the judge denied the motion to dismiss brought by the state of Illinois. And I think this case, like the other cases, are going to come within the preemption or federal or some form of the supremacy clause, whether it's intergovernmental immunity or federal preemption, as the case may be. They'll say this is an attempt to either discriminate against them. This is an attempt to regulate or restrict unique federal activities that are that you can't do under intergovernmental immunity doctrine, or that it's areas that have been preempted by federal law. I think that's the most likely determination. All these cases, same in Colorado, where they created a bunch of laws just to govern ICE detention facilities, not detention in any of their other jails or anything else, just ICE detention facilities. And I think you're going to see the courts there also say this is an invasion of the supremacy clause and outside the power of the states to do. So to be honest with you, it's the Democrats being put on their own petard. They came up with this doctrine when the state of Arizona tried to enforce federal immigration laws, and President Obama wouldn't let them do it. Not even for the purposes of election integrity, not even for the purpose of protecting their local employment market, not even for the purposes of limiting the risk of crime in their communities, not even for the purpose of enforcing just what was already on the books as federal law. They said, no, you state officials cannot do so. You cannot find means and mechanisms of do so. And that was all Democratic judges and Democratic lawyers making those arguments. And they got Justice Roberts to go along with it at the Supreme Court level. Well, now you don't get to turn around and complain and say, oh, hold on a second. Now that the shoe's on the other foot, we got to reverse those principles, everybody. Too late for that. You prohibited sanctuary states in a wide range of ways. It's going to prohibit sanctuary cities in this kind of way. You can not join in enforcing federal law voluntarily. You can be that kind of sanctuary, but you can't be an active sanctuary by prohibiting federal government law enforcement under restrictive conditions, whether it be mask mandates or lack of mask mandates in this case. Specialized Bivens actions, regulating detention facilities. All of these actions are going to fail by local and state governments. Just like the efforts to prohibit the president from ending temporary protected status. After all, it's called temporary protected status. So theoretically, the president should have always had that authority to begin with. But once the Supreme Court made its decision, some lower courts went back and forth. Finally, they're all recognizing, no, the executive branch has unilateral authority to revoke temporary protected status, even if it's done by somebody as idiotic as the former governor of South Dakota, who was busy banging her aide while illicitly lining the pockets of people around her, who's no longer the head of health and the head of the Homeland Security. But so now all the orders concerning temporary protected status are starting to be enforced all across the country, including Haitians who are being detained in Springfield, Ohio, where they like to eat the cats and the dogs, according to President Trump in the 2024 debate.
But the one that we're talking about tonight, though, it was about Ethiopians who had their TPS, and I forget exactly what the reason why the TPS was issued, and I'm going to double check while you talk as to what year it was issued in.
There's been lots of conflict in Ethiopia, and their civil war. You could argue we helped restart it, but there's all kinds of activities right near them because remember, Ethiopia is near that strait that's currently closed by the Houthis in Yemen. The Bab al-Mandeb, I believe it's called. I mispronounce everything. Sorry if I did. But it's where Saudi oil currently can't get out. Oh, well, never mind. The energy secretary says, don't worry, it's all getting out. the fictional oil is all getting out of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, everybody could see whether a tanker was there beforehand, and is it still in the Gulf, Persian Gulf. They can see whether even if they turn off their radar while they try to get through the Sea of Oman, which is what the Trump administration is claiming, 40 tankers got through. And the people who specialize in this, because their economics depend on being accurate in it. People's money is literally where their mouth is. Groups like Kepler and others have said, no, maybe 1 or 2 got through, not 40, because you can tell when it's out on the water, right? Its radar may not be on when it's trying to get through, but its radar would have been on earlier, so it would have been found in the Persian Gulf earlier, and you can see if it's still there or not. And then once they get through the Gulf, then once they get out on open sea, they're going to turn the radar back on, so you can see it then, and it ain't showing up anywhere other than in Trump's invisible brain that he was talking to him. He goes, it's like the Iranians he's secretly negotiating with that are in the room. When he's it's a reverse of the old TDS meme. Trump's in there on the shrink's bed. They're like, these Iranians you're negotiating with, are they here in the room with us? Apparently the tankers are too. The 40 tankers coming out every night. Poor Energy Secretary Wright trying to spend that every night. It's funny, sec.
I looked at just so they got their TPS in December 2022, and let me just read you the reason. It was for
there was an all that whole area is riddled with violence and civil war.
Yeah, it says large-scale displacement, severe climate-related humanitarian conditions in Ethiopia.
They're hoping the Ethiopians would vote Democrat.
So they got the TPS status. It was revoked. They got an injunction staying the revocation of the TPS, but with the way all the other ones have been gone, the stay was terminated. The
Right.
TPS revocation was ratified, except Robert, you'll tell us what this all means. The Fifth Amendment, they can still challenge it on Fifth Amendment violations, equal protections.
If they can try to claim that they're being targeted for discriminatory purposes, though I think that's contrary to what the Supreme Court ruled this past term. So I think they're going to shut all that down, and all TPS is going to be lost by the end of next year. So this ability to limit the executive branch from enforcing those laws is going to be limited itself. And I think you're going to see everybody going back, whether Starvin' Marvin from South Park, no Starvin' Marvin, that's my Popeye, as Cartman said, or any of the others. I think most of them will be, because they were brought in under politically dubious grounds. There was some legitimate refugee crisis related to Ethiopia due to the civil war there, and we're on both sides of it, depending on what the circumstances are. You got the Israelis are involved, the Emiratis are involved in South Sudan and other places around there in Somaliland. You've got all these people. Like a lot of the Somalis we brought over were the ones that were involved in it, like Ilhan Omar's father, that were involved in systematic torture and abuse of people, but on behalf and at the behest of our own intelligence agencies. That's why they came in. People seem to think it's always just some lefty Democratic. No, usually it's some intelligence connection. Some military action that created the refugee crisis. That is the political pretext to actually bring them in, even if Democrats have a particular political motive, believing they'll vote Democrat to keep them here. Now, of course, what you will find is a lot of these temporary protected status people were brought in particular communities that needed cheap labor to undercut the local labor market.
That was what we discovered about Springfield, Ohio, as to why they were bringing them all there. And it finally came out that, who was it that was employing them? It was a food company that was, I don't want to say Tyson. Who was employing them in Springfield, Ohio?
I don't mind if it's libelous, if it's Tyson Foods. I'm all for blaming Tyson Foods for almost. Remember, Tyson Foods probably coincidentally sounds a lot like the Tyson from the Nazi company, the Nazi Tyson company. Might just be a coincidence. Tyson Foods is busy laying off people, but that's a good bridge to Tyson Foods is one of the problem with our food market. That President Trump came up with a solution this week that was very controversial in rancher country, which was he's going to import a bunch of foreign beef. Sometimes it might even be mystery meat, not sure, but particularly from Argentina and from other countries at discounted prices, because that's his solution to the rising price of beef in America. As every rancher pointed out, anybody connected to the food movement and the farmer movement knows that undermines any practicable solution, either for the safety or affordability of food in America, particularly beef, but also to protect our farmers and our ranchers. We want beef made here in America from Americans. The best way to solve that problem, the reason for our current problem is the diminishing cattle herds due to a range of regulatory restrictions and economic disincentives created by the big producer monopolies that basically use federal law to force monopolistic practices on ordinary farmers. So you got a local rancher down the street, maybe he's been a fifth generation rancher. Maybe you're Amos Miller, and you've been developing meat since from your father did it, your grandfather did it, your great-grandfather did it, your great-great-grandfather did it, your great-great-great-great-grandfather did it, right there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And yet right now, you're prohibited from directly selling that meat to willing and interested customers. You have to go through all of these shenanigans to be able to sell anything. And the reason for that is the federal government and the state governments interfering and intruding upon your right to decide what goes into your body, and the farmer's ability to be able to sell food to their own neighbor. So instead, they force them to send it all to these big limited processing plants, which, because of the cost involved, often scales up to the small group of monopolies for processors of food control over 80% of American food supply in a wide range of items from beef to poultry to even more. And the net effect of that is our food the quality diminishes. The Tyson Foods of the world lay people off and don't treat their employees well, while diminishing the quality of that food. That often the price point reflects that at least some of what's in your beef ain't beef because of this. And in particular, what they would like is they would like to bring in foreign beef that you have no idea how it was grown. You have no idea whether it meets any safety standards. You have no idea who the farmer is. You have no idea the quality of that food. And it's mostly big monopolists who are big foreign donors, who are big donors through their domestic subsidiaries to U.S. political causes, who then want to give it to these big monopolists here in the United States, and under the guise of lowering costs, even though over time they're increasing costs to line their own pockets at the expense of your health, your choice, and our farmers' ability to successfully farm. Our ranchers are getting hammered. So the practical solution is things like Congressman Thomas Massey's Prime Act, which is still being debated within the House and the Senate. That's already passed the House once, should get through. It's what the president should be supporting. And that allows for more farmers to be able to sell their food directly to you, the customer. What we have tested at 1776 Law Center and polling done by Richard Barris, People's Pundit Daily. You can find it at Big Data Poll. You can also find it at 1776lawcenter.com. And we've got, and we'll be putting up more data and information on this for the food freedom context, which was if you would take away all the restrictions and restraints, why should a government bureaucrat decide what food you put in your stomach? Why should a government bureaucrat decide what farmer can sell food directly to you? You should be able to buy food right down the street from the local farmer. You should be able to buy it from the rancher you trust, from the farmer you believe in. Amish farmer Amos Miller has been one of the most successful farmers measured by safety according to his own customers and consumers of his food, who he sold millions of food products to tens of thousands of Americans over more than a quarter century, and not a one has ever filed any complaint about the quality of that food ever in that entire quarter century plus history. But he's not allowed to do it. Instead, we're going to bring in a bunch of foreign beef from some foreign corporation that's controlled by these big foreign monopolies to line the pockets of the big monopolies here at home, who Trump promised a year ago he was going to bring antitrust action, but he's too busy letting that unregistered criminal felon corporate lobbyist, Mike Davis, undermine such prosecutions at the antitrust division. And instead, he's rewarding and enriching his donors at the expense of American ranchers and at the expense of the American people. You want a solution to the food cost and the food price? Empower ranchers, empower farmers, empower the American people, not empower government bureaucrats or give special deals to foreigners.
And I was double checking. The company was Dole, Robert. It wasn't Tyson. It was Dole Vegetables in Ohio, where that was hiring a lot of the Haitians. There were a couple of other tech companies in there. I mean, well, yeah, whatever. We're not going to get into the negative stuff of what's going to happen come November. But
yeah, here's a good solution. Like this would be positive with ranchers. It would be positive for food freedom. It'd be positive for MAHA. It'd be positive for the American people. It'd be positive for the affordability crisis, which is allow ordinary people to buy food directly from the farmer. You choose who you buy your food from. Your farmer has full, free, unfettered access to sell food to whoever wants his food, chooses his food. That will reduce the price of the food, increase the quality of the food, national security. It's in our national security to stabilize the food supply to be here in the domestic United States. And it doesn't give special favoritism to donors and foreigners. That could help save them in states like Texas, where there's big House and Senate races, in states like Iowa, where there's big House and Senate races and gubernatorial races, in key states where this is a key issue, in states like Montana, where there's big House and Senate races. It would be smart politically and smart policy. It would be a win-win. So just restore the right of food freedom in America for ordinary people to buy food directly from the farmer without a special permission slip from a government bureaucrat.
And it's not like it's even it would even create risks. We're seeing the contamination with the lettuce that's coming out of big. You
know who rejected? They'll give you how bad some of this foreign food is from places like Argentina and Mexico. China even rejected it. China was like, your food is poison. This is China. They literally eat everything. When they serve you pigeon soup, they put the pigeon's head in the middle of the soup. You go to their food thing. They eat everything. It's not like China's been known for its food safety standards. And even they were like, Argentine beef, no thank you, it's contaminated. So We don't want to use those big corporation food from foreigners. We don't need food from foreigners. We don't need big corporations and corrupt donors and the big monopolists in the U.S. controlling our food supply. We don't need bureaucrats controlling our food supply. We need you, the American people, and the ordinary farmer controlling our food supply.
This can't be real, Robert. I mean, a pigeon, if it's just another word for a bird.
I guarantee you I had it. At one of the fanciest hotels in all of Hong Kong. First time I was there, they served me pigeon soup. And in the middle was the pigeon's head. The pigeon's head. This was considered high-end cuisine in China. High-end.
This is a pigeon like the street bird, not like a nice dove type thing that...
With those little red eyes staring at you.
Huh. All right. Now, hold on. What do we have left? And we got to take the party on over
to the mega trial. We got a couple of election cases. We got Harvard selling body parts. We got Compass violating antitrust laws. We got ABC suing the FCC. But our last big First Amendment and immigration-related case is, can you raid a church, or are they sanctuaries for illegals?
Field it. I mean, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they are sanctuaries for illegals, in as much as if there's ecclesiastical law that prohibits interfering with the administration of the church, they sure as sugar are going to be places where you don't get to exercise law enforcement. Is going to be my guess, Robert.
Yes, they. So the Trump administration changed the internal procedures and policies of the Department of Homeland Security to allow the ICE agents to enter religious facilities, whether they be churches, orphanages, other kind of religious facilities, for the purposes of arresting and detaining those illegals that there is an active warrant for here in the United States. A bunch of churches brought suit in federal district court alleging a violation of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was an act passed by Congress, which says federal law enforcement cannot substantially burden the right of churches or church members. This, remember, is a broader right than is the case under the First Amendment. They also brought a First Amendment challenge under the right of religious expression and association free from state imposition or intrusion or discrimination. The churches, the courts determined, had standing because they said the illegals won't attend church if they think there's a risk of them being arrested there. And so they concluded that it was a substantial burden on religious exercise and the associative interest of the churches themselves, not just the illegals, who there might be some constitutional question as to whether they could bring suit or had standing to do so. And so because they said the churches were being burdened substantially, they said that the raids could not happen unless the Department of Homeland Security met strict scrutiny. And at the trial court level, they apparently did not attempt to show they met strict scrutiny. Not sure why the Department of Homeland Security failed that. Maybe you had local U.S. attorneys who didn't really agree with it and undermined the defense of it at the appellate level. But ultimately, the court said that because you didn't argue strict scrutiny at the trial court level, you don't get to argue at the appellate court level, and they effectively enjoined the ICE from raiding churches to enforce immigration law. And that that case may go up to the Supreme Court of the United States, but given the apparent inadequacy of the preserving the record, it may not be a case that the feds want to pursue up to that level. They may wait for another case to bring a separate ancillary challenge to whether or not they can enter churches. Is it really is it a narrowly tailored means to enforce immigration law in the United States to enter churches for the purposes of immigration arrest? That's to be honest with you, well, they didn't make the argument, so I don't know what their argument would be.
Well, I mean, I would imagine maybe it's not even an argument worth making. You don't want the optics of like shootings and incidents to happen at churches. And so for whatever the risks that they pose for impeding federal immigration and enforcement, save the battle for the street. And so God forbid you don't have like a Renee Good incident in a church, or you don't have churches being burnt down. And I don't even know why you'd want to even get into that. If it's that big of a problem that so many illegals are being housed and hidden in churches, to make that risk or to put that risk on the table.
I would suggest that the people who came up with this rule change were not truly motivated by immigration enforcement. They want to look like hardliners, but they were trying to be so excessive and provocative because they knew from public survey data done by Richard Barris, Mark Mitchell, and others that things like this, like wearing masks, like doing raids in open streets in cities with armed men, and other things would backfire politically. And yet they chose that precise path, including threatening to raid churches, that their real goal was to trigger a backlash against immigration enforcement so that the donor class could make sure the real immigration enforcement didn't happen, which everybody knows would be raids of employers and arrest of employers and big corporations profiting off the illegal immigration. As Vice President Vance himself told Joe Rogan in October of 2024, the main profiteers and main inducers of illegal immigration in the United States are big corporations. So why is the administration not targeting any big corporations for raids, not targeting any big corporations for civil and criminal prosecution related to illegal immigration, and instead deliberately choosing the most politically controversial targets and mechanisms of illegal immigration enforcement? Maybe it's not because they really want to enforce immigration laws. Maybe Stephen Miller has been lying to you all along, as he often did at America First Legal, when he abandoned various clients' cases and causes that he volunteered to take on at key junctures when it no longer served and suited his personal interest, while his wife gets a sweetheart podcast deal from Paramount, who they helped cover for in illegal antitrust cases they failed to prosecute that are currently scheduled for trial later on this year or early next year because their efforts to dismiss failed. But maybe what looks like we just want to enforce those immigration laws is exactly the opposite of what it appears.
Now you mentioned Mark Mitchell, by the way, he launched a YouTube channel. I'm reluctant to share a CommieTube, but he's started his new venture. So anybody who wants to go support it.
Yeah, you can find the Honest Poll on YouTube. Mark Mitchell goes into great detail as to why he was fired by Rasmussen. What's the backstory? I had people tell me, "Barnes, you're making that up." Well, since I was representing Mark, I knew I wasn't making it up. But you can hear it directly from Mark Mitchell as he goes into detail as to what's really happening in the polling community, what really happened to him at the Honest Poll on YouTube. So you can follow it all the way through there.
You got the link there. We're going to take the party on over to vivabarneslaw.locals.com in a second. Is the Stop Nick Shirley Act legal? Did we talk about this?
I would generally say a law that says to stop a particular person probably isn't legal, but I haven't seen the law yet.
You know, I don't think that's the official name, but it was certainly the object of the law. We covered it tangentially a while back. What do we have left? And let me bring. Oh gosh, sorry.
You're trying to eliminate me.
Wrong one, Robert.
trying to 86 me right at the top. We got the mega trial with Meta that may decide the future of Meta. It may be a $1.4 trillion verdict. Why does that matter? It's about the full market valuation of Meta, otherwise known as Facebook. Owned by Mark. Never mind. I was going to use a crude version of Zuckerberg. There's redistricting claims before Missouri Supreme Court. The Voting Rights Act exemption for Wisconsin for disclosing registration records before the 7th Circuit. Harvard caught stealing body parts. Maybe those medical school morgues are meant for something else. ABC sues the Federal Communications Commission alleging First Amendment violations by the Trump administration. And Compass, that company that got away with its antitrust violation, isn't getting away with it by bringing civil suit for its antitrust violations, jacking up the rents on ordinary Americans.
All right, we're going to figure out who to raid. Let me bring this back in here and just read a couple. Astral Doge Plays raided us. May Dog says, look the other way on data centers for a second as Rumble just purchased 9 from Northern Data. The Rumble platform is financially challenged, particularly because of the advertising cartel. Thank you, Tether. No, I know Chris. I know Chris has been he's been on with Matt Kors talking about it, and it's going. Look, there's an argument. There's also a public perception issue that Chris is going to have to navigate on data centers because they're getting a bad rap, along with flock cameras, which I think deserve the bad rap. Data centers.
Oh yes, surveillance centers. I'm against data centers. I think it's all one big massive. But here's the thing: you're going to put a data center. Why don't you put it in the inner city? Put it in the inner city. Put it where there's a bunch of abandoned real estate, unused real estate, undeveloped real estate. Don't put it out in pristine countryside. Don't put it out in small to wipe out small farms. Don't put it out in somebody's nice community where you get the hum or they pollute everything. But I think the bigger problem is I think it's one big fat bubble. And I think it's going to blow up the whole market. I think it's going to blow up a whole bunch of things. Everybody, the only thing that's true about artificial intelligence ain't the intelligence, it's the artificiality of it. But that's a whole other debate for another day. But Meta faces its own problems, other than its various AI problems it keeps running into, which is state attorney generals. The first part of a massive trial. 29 state attorney generals have brought suit. 4 of them go to trial in Oakland, California this week, starting there, about whether or not Meta systemically went out to set out to destroy the minds and souls of young people across the country in violation of both state statutory unfair Practices and Deception Act law, but also in violation of a particular federal law that state attorney generals have the right to enforce. And that is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, passed in 1998, meant to give parents complete control and custody through adequate notice by big tech of anything their children 12 and under were getting access to. And they had to circumvent those precise restrictions and restraints in order to make sure the young people were locked in, because they understood that if they could lock in the young people, they locked in the future generations. This is why there is so much more advertising done for people under the age of 30 than there is for people over the age of 60. Why? Because if you're Coca-Cola, you want a customer for 50, 60, 70 years, not for 10 or 15 years. So we've documented here throughout the last 2 years all the ways big tech was manipulating and harming our young people in particular, targeting them, helping to get pederassed and pedophiles. Hey, pederass, here's a child to meet. And then sending to the child, hey, child, why don't you meet this sweet little pederass? Why don't you meet this sweet little pedophile? That's what the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world were doing. No wonder they like Jeffrey Epstein so much. And so they are now being sued. And the damages claims are for all the kids harmed in all of their states.
It's 1.5 trillion, which is basically the value of the company. And I mean, there's been, I say from their perspective, very bad precedent already set at the state level. I think it's New Mexico,
in both California and New Mexico. A federal jury in California found him liable. A state court in New Mexico, the state jury found him liable. This is Oakland, California. The jury will be an advisory jury because under the federal law, the judge gets to make the final decision. But is a judge really going to go against what a jury determines? And I get so far what's been happening is all these judges have been shocked as the evidence comes out. I think it's called The Creepy Thin Line is one of them. There's another documentary. We'll probably watch it this Saturday. Got to return of movie night to vivabarneslaw.locals.com every Saturday night, 9 o'clock. That will be coming back. And one of them probably be one of these documentaries where the people who built the algorithms admit themselves they were out to harm and manipulate our children for their personal profit, including, again, things like helping pedophiles and pederass meet your kids. So so I'm all in favor of this suit, and I hope they bankrupt them. I hope they take him down.
It'll be the new tobacco or those tires.
Big tech is like big tobacco, but targets 6-year-olds and destroys the soul of society. So it's it's hard to be worse than what big tobacco did for 30 years, but big tech is worse.
Well, big tobacco arguably targeted children or young people.
They did. Teenagers. They targeted teenagers, but at least you got the bonus of smoking, not the manipulation of Instagram filters.
All right, people, I've given everybody the links. Go follow on Spotify. We're going to end this show across platforms except on locals because I'm using StreamYard now. We're going to go raid, whatever. There's no paywall, so don't complain that you don't want to come to locals. There's no paywall. If you have Rumble Premium, you can come anyhow.
You can hop right over. We'll cover redistricting. We'll cover the Voting Rights Act for election integrity cases. We'll cover Harvard selling people's body parts. We got ABC suing the Trump administration and the big company Compass trying to monopolize to fix rents. We got those 5 cases and all the questions, tips of $5 or more over at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And remember, if you want, there's a discount code. You get almost 2/3 off only this week. Then it's done. It's finito. It's finished. It's over at sportspicks.locals.com. So you can go there. You got to use the web page to get access to the discount. And you put in discount code 1776 and you get a whole year for basically less than $1 a day. That's going to have over 2,000 predictions in elections, events, economics, politics, and sports throughout the year. So if you want the benefit of that, sportspicks.locals.com, but ends this week.
I went to raid this whatever podcast, and they said IDF raid. Robert, this is how people have lost their effing mind. IDF raid. Okay, doesn't matter. I can't let it bother me. Robert, serenity now. Everybody. Robert,
is that the one that has all the hose on?
Yes, it is. I can't, because Salty Cracker won't let anybody raid him, so I can't do it. What do you have coming up this week, Robert, before we leave?
So we'll be over at the, let's see, who am I on with this week? Probably with Mario Knopfel at some point, Jim Webb at some point, Judge Napolitano at some point, maybe with Nima with Dialogue Works, Larry Johnson at his Currents. There's a Transition Protocols plus a Currents podcast that he hosts. And then at some point, maybe with the Duran, and then bourbons at vivabarneslaw.locals.com throughout the week. I don't know if we're doing a what are the odds tomorrow or not. Depends on where Barris is. So either this Monday or next Monday, we're going to do a deep dive into the House, the Senate, the governorships, the state legislatures, everything that's happening politically in a range of elections with Richard Barris. What are the odds at People's Pundit Daily? But I don't think we're doing that tomorrow, but I haven't heard from him. So It might be next Monday. But yeah, so it'll be a bunch of appearances throughout the week through a bunch of things. I have a Substack up on the U.S. Senate. I'm going to rename that the Barnes Brief because Mario Knopfel wanted me to have a Substack. I publish all those articles at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, where we have a daily Barnes Brief. That'll be up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday with curated content from across the web, art of the day, wisdom of the day, and the like. But otherwise, it'll be available at the Bourbons at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
All right, amazing. And now I'm going to be live all day. I'll be live daily. Probably have some good guests, so stay tuned for that. We are ending it on CommiTube. You know where to find us. Come to Spotify. Come to vivabarneslaw.locals.com. Removing from YouTube. Bye-bye.